Welcome, Wargamers, to the treacherous, blood-stained corners of the mortal realms, because today we are finally jumping into Dawnbringers Book 5, Shadow of the Crone, and this is video 1 of its coverage. I know that I am still catching up on lore videos. I'm hard at work at this, and if you want to follow along the plot with the Dawnbringer Crusade series, please pause this video, go back into this playlist you can see down below, and there's a ton more videos to get you caught up on them. And we're going to talk about the various parts of this crusade, as well as the main plot of what's going on, and the various sidebars that kind of give us a little bit more of a glimpse into the meta-narrative of Age of Sigmar. Let's talk more about the Dawnbringers' Shadow of the Crone. Now, this book is a little bit different in that the other ones started with kind of like a meta-narrative kind of glimpse, a third-person omniscient view of what the various crusades have been through, maybe like things that are affecting both of them. In this one, it's a little bit different because it begins with a kind of a sidebar story, and one that we need to remember as we jump into the main narrative of this particular book. This little sidebar story is set in Hammerhall, Akshi, and we know from the previous Dawnbringer books that this city is under siege, specifically from Khorne armies coming at them from multiple directions. In the very first Dawnbringers book, at some point, Vedra turns back with a small portion of the Crusade's army to go assist in the defense of Hammerhall Akshi once they realize, oh man, the Khorne armies were just waiting for these Crusades to leave so they could pounce on the weaker cities. Well, our little side quest of a story here focuses specifically on a Daughters of Cain temple within the city itself. With this as the backdrop, a strange figure approaches. Some of the Daughters of Cain and a Hag Queen confront this person for trespassing, of like, you don't step into the Daughters of Cain temple all willy-nilly. And this character, this mysterious cloaked figure, reveals herself to be Prathusa, and is something called a Crone Herald. You see, during this whole siege of Khorne outside the city walls, there has been a shadow war going on in most of the major cities that have a Daughters of Cain temple. There is a rift forming within their faction, between those who see Morathi as a god exactly as she presents herself in their battle tome, and those, like our Crone Herald here, who see her as a charlatan. We don't get a ton of insight into that narrative, because the conversation ends pretty abruptly with a brutal fight that sees the Crone Herald slaughter a bunch of witch elves, and he basically uses their corpses in a scrying ritual, where then the scene fades to black. And I thought I would mention it because, well, I mean, the book's named after this character, right? The Shadow of the Crone. It's a Crone Herald. And I wanted to remember that this is said to be happening in the background of everything else we're going to talk about, at least with Akshi related to the city itself. And this is a good spot to point out that this book is laid out a little bit differently than the others. Like I said before, instead of, a third-person omniscient narrative on both cities, we start with this little sidebar story, but then it goes a step further and kind of divides the book differently as well. Because realistically, there are 3 distinct stories happening in this book. There's obviously the 2 crusades that we've been following forever. The one, the Crusade of Fire in Akshi, led by Pontifex Zenestra. And then there's the Hammerhall Gyra Crusade, led by Marshal Thorian. But the third story that comes in with this book is actually what's going on back at Hammerhall Akshi. And quite frankly, I like this because I felt specifically like the Akshi side of stuff really got bogged down. And it just kind of became a repetitive, we fight 2 battles and shuffle forward, get more zealous. But remembering all the terrible things that are going on back at home is important, and I'm really stoked to get into it. So the way I want to tackle this is basically doing dedicated videos for each front. This video is going to be all about what's going on in Hammerhall Akshi, because I am crushing these videos back to back and I need a palate cleanser from the Wheel Lady. Then we'll talk about the Akshi Crusade itself, and then the other 2 videos will concern the Gyran Crusade. At least in this book, we don't get much of a picture of what's going on in Hammerhall Gyra, which adds like, oh, I want to know. But whatever. Okay, so Hammerhall Akshi has been through its own journey that we haven't really even followed all that much throughout these books. It started with a plague of malaise, and then zealotry took over for a bit to get the populace excited and moving again, and it kind of helped purge away some of that, Nurgle loss of enthusiasm, we'll say. Then at one point, Explosions started to erupt as enemies were crawling out of the mines. There was some bits of Skaven here. There was Gloomspite Gits coming up. There was a whole thing where refugees were pouring in because Trog the Trogkith King, or whatever his name was running around actually. All that stuff was still happening. And now, at the outset of all that, there's at least 2 Khorne armies besieging it that happen to have artillery. I don't know, skull cannons, I guess. So they've been through a lot, and so I go through that quick list of things that we've seen them experience throughout this campaign, because this is the most heavily defended place outside of Azir, and it does not look good. Now, what's fortunate, I suppose you could say, is that the overwhelming majority of Hammerhal Akshi's problems are outside, or at least external. As long as they're a unified force, it doesn't really matter how many enemies come at them. The walls will stand and we will ride this out and so on. But the problem is, not all issues are external. And that's where our story picks up in Hammerhal Akshi, on the trail of the fabled heroes Callus and Tull. This is a witch hunter for the Order of Azir and his Free Guild bodyguard that make a fantastic duo. To be perfectly honest, I've made this suggestion before. If you want a slice of the old world in Age of Sigmar, I say forget Gotrek. Go read the Callus and Tull books, because they feel like that classic fantasy mapped into the Age of Sigmar universe, and they're just fantastic stories unto themselves. That's my hot take of the video. But Callus, our witch hunter friend here, is looking around and investigating a strange rash of murders that are going on within the city. It doesn't seem like an infiltration. You know, they're kind of looking for, you know, maybe Khorne armies broke a hole somewhere, or maybe another subterranean enemy got in. So it's not infiltration, and it was too bloody for it to be something like a civil riot. I mean, people were like mangled and shredded and torn apart. Like, this is not just people being unhappy about what's going on either. Upon his investigation and seeing the assailants that were all locked up, Callus is starting to get the sense that something's not right. It's as if one night, a whole group of people just went absolutely insane. They became gibbering fanatics. They only speak in a few kind of barely recognizable words. They lose whole clumps of their hair. They become gaunt and feral. And I like the kind of initiative here where he's kind of going through the Rolodex of terrible things that exists in the mortal realms. He's like, well, it's not a zombie curse because they're not dead. They're not infectious in any way in particular. They're just kind of plain old crazy. Now, one of the things that Callus does learn from his investigation is that through, you know, sources of watching them prior to them going insane, they were drinking something called King's Blood. And this was shared amongst some kind of party. What happened to these people loosely seems like it might have been connected to this. And not only that, but it's happening more and more across the city. To yada yada just a bit, Callus takes these reports, these incidents to the city council, but of course, there's not a lot of attention to be spared because, you know, this is a mysterious thing that we can't put a finger on, as opposed to the very real, very tangible armies literally outside of our gates. It makes sense that that's where everybody's focus is. So Callus goes to a Stormcast Eternal in Hammerhal named Lord Castellant Valius, who's responsible for the purity of the city. Together, they reason that the pattern and scraps of information they have point to one thing. Someone is going to try and poison the waters of Hammerhal Akshi with this king's blood. They kind of decipher this from mad gibbering and the scraps of paper and notes that they have from the people trying to write out plans that are playing out in their head. It's a lot of little clues, but basically that's the idea. They think someone's going to try and poison the water. There's not a lot of troops to spare, but the city has one unit, the Undercrofters, which is the 3rd Battalion of the 56th Wilder Corps, who excel at infiltration and subterranean tactics. Guys, these are the coolest things ever. They gave the Wilder Corps Scouts Cities of Sigmar unit a name and a background, and they just sound really cool. But honestly, between this unit, Callus and Tull, and the Stormcast himself, the Lord Castellant, that's your defenders of the internal workings of Hammerhal. And so, the party goes down into the sewers, being led by Wildercore bloodhounds, and basically I think they were kind of shown some of the scraps of stuff that the ghouls had, and were like, find them! And so the Dogs are leading them further and further into the catacombs of the city, and it takes them a long time to get anywhere meaningful. You have to remember, Hammerhall is a massive place with a very complex web of water lines that link it, pumps that feed into reservoirs that feed into other pumps, and so on. But after a while, the tunnels kind of take on an uncanny feeling. Shadows begin dancing at them. Basically, this part puts everyone, the veteran soldiers and everybody, on high alert, and they eventually make their way into a large underground cavern, like a super chamber. Inside of this is an underground lake that's lined with all kinds of Duarden mechanisms. Basically, it's an underground reservoir that's pumping water here to the rest of the city. Only what they see here is horrifying and makes more than a few of them vomit up, because along every stretch of the walls in this cavern are tapestries of flayed flesh. Human skin and gore are everywhere. Dead bodies and all their insides are bobbing and floating in this water, which is now being pumped up to the rest of the city. At this moment, a shriek goes out, and hundreds of Flesh-Eater Court ghouls descend on our party. The Wilder Corps essentially plays a defensive maneuver to let Callus and Toll get to the mechanisms of the Duarden machines and shut the whole thing down. And when Callus finds it, he starts pulling at levers to shut down the water pumps. While that's happening, he's actually attacked by a Ghoul King, which he promptly shoots in the face at point-blank range. The Ghoul King then reels back, and from this corrupted lake bursts a Terrorgeist that he hops onto the back of. Which, this has to be like a really cool scene. I wish there was artwork of it. It just sounds awesome. And it's here that the ebb and flow of the battle kind of turns. It's on the other side of this chamber that the reinforcements they have, Lord Castellan Valius, was split off from the group, and he came around, so now the four enemies enveloped, and the two teams work in conjunction to bring down the Ghoul King and ultimately stop the corrupted water from being pumped up. Now, one thing to note in this story is that Toll, I believe it was, at one point falls from the console, like the control console for the pumps, and before he lands in this corrupted gore lake that surely would have driven him mad or did something nasty to him, a winged elf swoops in and saves him. And this is where we get a direct interplay with our pre-roll story. The Crone Herald has shown up and has an active interest in keeping the soul of Hammerhall pure. Whether or not she thinks Morathi is God, these are our allies and we need to help them. Now, like all of my videos, I'm going to pause here and step back and ask, why is this cool? Well, first of all, the Crone Herald is everywhere. I love the idea of a religious, schism within the zealotry-based factions like Daughters of Cain. And I will absolutely be doing a video covering the Crone Heralds once we get caught up, with the main story and everything. But that sidebar was, for sure, really interesting. It makes sense that they'd also be there hunting Flesh-Eater Courts too. It's an interesting kind of mirror because blood is such an important part of their rituals as it is with the Flesh-Eater Court's madness. And of course, the Crone Herald has a basic need to preserve their own temple, right? Of course, it's self-defense in that regard as well. My point is, the Crone Herald, although they didn't feature much in this story, didn't feel like such a wild MacGuffin as I feel like other literal swooping in and saving the day, heroes have been in Age of Sigmar. At least the books about her, so I feel like it's warranted. As for the story here, I loved it, to be honest with you. And the simple reason is that we see on a very practical level what all the lore we've read in the Flesh-Eater Court books points to. You can read about King's Blood and how it's distributed to cities in the Flesh-Eater Court Battle Tome, but this is a story of what it's like when a city drinks it, which is the other side of that equation we don't get from the Battle Tome. What does it look like to be infected with King's Blood? What does that kind of destabilization look like? Well, if you're not looking acutely for it, it can look like riots. It could look like chaos worshippers. It could look like just general madness. And this story helps us kind of get the seed of an idea that King's Blood really acts like a seed itself. It makes a few people go very crazy, and if there's an opportunity there, a Ghoul King will be alerted nearby, and then their task comes into basically corrupting this entire society that's already been seeded with King's Blood. Bring them into the fold. In this particular case, it seemed the Ghoul King here was doing a ritual that acted as a loci for the king's blood. Essentially, I think if they added enough guts and stuff to this water and were able to bless it, it could become, just as corrupting and evil and powerful as drinking Ushurin's blood itself. I think that was kind of the idea, but that this was going to corrupt people on a massive scale. But there's a few things that we don't get here. For example, how far had this corruption already spread is never actually specified. But we do know the source of it is at least stopped. That being said, I think it's a great self-contained story with Callus and Tull. Like if Cubicle 7 made a one-off of their adventure for Soulbound, which would be awesome. If you were like with that Wilder Corps here, that would just be the coolest like one-off story ever. Even if they all do meet a bloody end. But like the clues that they had mentioned as far as them piecing together what's going on in the city, working their way down into the sewer works, being led by dogs, having to fight off villains on the way. It just kind of seemed like a perfect role-playing story that was just put on display for us. And now it's like, well, I want to play that now. Or at least have Cubicle 7 make an equivalent story of what's going on in Hammerhall Gyra. That'd be cool too. I'll take that. So friends, I want to ask you as we close the video, what do you think? This is all the stuff that we get for what's going on in Hammerhall Akshi. In our next video, we're going to see what's up with the Crusade, and you can decide for yourself who has it worse. And I would love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, listening, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends! Welcome, wargamers, to the super rough and worn down corners of the Mortal Realms, because today we are talking about Dawnbringers Book 5, Shadow of the Crone, and this is video 2 of its coverage. Now, I mentioned before that this book was split up a little bit differently than the other ones. Instead of having 2 stories going on of the various crusades, instead this one has a story for the Crusade and for Hammerhall Akshi on the Akshi side, and then it's all the Crusade on the Giran side. So it's actually 3 stories total. Yesterday we talked all about what's going on in Hammerhall Akshi, how they staved off a massive Flesh Eater Court's invasion, or corruption I should say, from the heart of the populace. And we know that they are being besieged currently by a few Khorne armies. But those armies were waiting for the Crusade to leave because it would draw out people and resources from Hammerhall Akshi. And so today we are going to pivot, we're going to refocus and go back here to talking about the Crusade of Fire. Now, remembering kind of where the Crusade was in our last discussion about them in the last book, they successfully drove off Neve Blacktalon. They got their well water poisoned, lost most of their professional military and logistics arm, and really the crux of that entire book for this side of the Crusade was Pontifex Zenestra trying to figure out how to undo the water poisoning. There was a nearby ruins that they went ahead into. It was filled with undead, but they were fought off, but in total, this was a net positive. They were able to use the power of the location to heal their water fountain. Things kind of ended on a somewhat positive note. And it's important to note here that these folks don't know what we discussed, that this place pretty much gets wiped out every 107 years like we do. And it's here, wait for it, that Pontifex Zenestra decides to settle her new city. And I dang near fell out of my seat for slapping my forehead so hard, because I was like, what a simple plot thing. If we're just going to settle here in this place that is an absolute ruin, nothing could go wrong. And then I thought about it for a bit, and the book actually, I will say, does a good deal of describing her logic. So here we go. I'm going to give you the Zenestra reason of why we're planting our new city here. The Grand Enclaves of Hammerhall that sent out these crusades had selected regions where good cities can be founded, meaning there's places to farm, there's water, probably mineral resources, something of value nearby, whatever they're looking for in a city. However, this crusade has a few realities that they have to meet when it comes to those ideal locations. First of all, not all those spots are even an option anymore. All of them are said to be far to the east of her current location, so no matter what, it's going to be an immense amount of travel to get to any of their prearranged places. They've just deviated so hard. But remember that this is a bus of fanatical lunatics, and they've been taking the wheels off of just about every cart that they have in a show of their religious displays, driven further by madness and zealotry. The point is that some of these locations aren't an option because they literally don't have the mechanisms to traverse the terrain. You need carts, wagons, and stuff to go up these hills. You don't have them anymore. So already a lot of their, pre-game, pre-crusade calculations have already fallen apart. Then you also have to consider how many survivors are actually still a part of this crusade now, knowing that they would lose more on the way to anywhere else that they would go. Even if they had a better location, are you going to have enough people to arrive there, should we leave here, to found a successful colony? Now, those are some hard logistical things to have to, overcome, but there are also some, realpolitik things going on here, too. For example, things that don't kind of fit onto a paper when you're doing math and equations about how you should proceed. For example, how much further can you actually push these people? There's no equation for that. But not just that, not how farther can you push them, but why would you want to? Like, this specific site is the place of an epic battle where they beat death forces and claimed it for Sigmar. They had a display of her power, which, was a big blinding light that destroyed a necromancer. She turned the rivers of blood into water, like an actual biblical miracle here when she cleansed the well. There's just a lot of significance. How much of that goodwill do you cash in when you make everyone start moving again? That's real rough. And other things complicate this decision as well, and act as a way of guiding us into our particular story today. Until, for example, the mountainous regions immediately next to this city is called the Ashen Mont. And when Zenestra sent out a few scouts, they returned with great news. It seems that whatever civilization was here before had already tried to start mining the mountains, and there's an entire steamworks built in. Some of them are already pumping realm stone from Akshi out of it, meaning this place is a gold mine. There's money to be made, there's arcane power to wield, and Pontifex Zenestra wants it. And so the order is given. Secure this place for the God King. The metaliths are unloaded and then erected in place. They basically act like floating fortresses. The remaining dispossessed clans are sent to scout and secure the mines and basically map it out for everybody, find weak points, defend them, which honestly they loved, right? Within the mines, these dwarves are just like, oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be in a mine and away from crazy wheel people. They're like having a ball, right? And they're looking around, they're seeing all this stuff that's already been built, and they're kind of putting maps together and being like, wow, they made a lot of progress here. How did they get wiped out so stinking hard? And it's during this initial cavern exploration that they find a realm gate that leads directly to Shyish. And it becomes immediately clear this has to be a thing that the previous tenants, I guess you could say, of the city must have accidentally stumbled in upon. Because there's no defenses built yet. It's just like a small cavernous wall collapsed and boom, there's a realm gate. Whereas everything else in the mines is very well, reinforced, and like I said, there's piping and mechanisms and all this kinds of stuff. The leader of this Dwarden party sends a group of scouts back to go report on what's going on. Because, if nothing else, this is a massive security concern, right? We should definitely at least seal something up. And just as the scouts leave, undead begin pouring in from every direction into this chamber where the realm gate was. It's Nighthaunt specifically. And the dispossessed mining crew is absolutely killed to a man, their leader's still trying to fight as best as he can, as Reikenor the Grimhailer himself rises from the ground. Now we learn in a bit of an omniscient narrator scene, Reikenor is here because there is a soul thief out and about in Akshi. One that works for the God King Sigmar, no less, and he's here to put a stop to it. And also claim this place for Nagash. Now, of course, it's not just Reikenor, but his Pyregeist flock as well. I did a video on them recently. Go check it out to go see what they do for armies. It's pretty terrifying stuff, but basically a bunch of ethereal flamethrowers made their way into the realm of fire. And Reikenor plans to basically step in and light this whole mountain up on fire. Not only is he going to wipe out the forces here, he's going to find this soul thief. We're going to set this entire range of mountains alight so that Nagash has a defined foothold within Akshi. But our camera moves back over to the scouts who were dispatched to warn Zenestra. They do not outpace the threat by much with their stunty little legs, but when Zenestra is told that there's a ton of Nighthaunt coming right now, her face of confidence just breaks for just like a quick second. I mean, she rallies and regains stuff, but she's just like, man, you gotta be kidding me. But orders are given, lines are formed up, and the mountains erupt in blue and green flame as the Nighthaunt descend upon the founding city of Embergard. Most of the soldiery, in response, did absolutely nothing. And by that I mean that their guns, their attacks, nothing was hurting the Nighthaunt with their ethereal effect. And if you aren't aware, the way around the ethereal stuff in the Age of Sigmar universe is by either magic, so like a magical sword or whatever, but also faith and conviction. When you say a prayer to Sigmar, you ask the God King to bless your blade, it imbues that weapon with purpose, direction, will. And that's the difference between life and death. It's the difference between a shield that stops a Nighthaunt's blow, a sword that pierces through them and, discorporeates them, and the weapons that just go straight through them and do nothing. So my point is, the average citizens and soldiers here don't have the strength of will, the faith, the perseverance to do much damage. But there is one part of Pontifex's army that has no such problems, and that is the religious zealots. The flagellants are out there with their whips and their chains and their maces, and they are tearing ghosts up. Because if all you need to have is, a surety of faith, then these guys are hitting on wounding on a 2-up with a reroll, ignore ethereal. Like, it's just madness. However, the problem is there's just not enough zealots to overwhelm the amount of Nighthaunt coming at them. I just kind of like that they took the time to explain, man, all these cities of Sigmar guys are dying real hard. And then there's just the crazy church guys on the other side having a grand time. And it's at this point when Reikenor emerges from the mountain, and he basically kind of takes in the battlefield from the sky and points out Zenestra. She is the soul thief. At least from his mind, whatever arrangement, if you haven't seen the Pontifex Zenestra model, she has like a corpse of the last Pontifex on her little ride, the palanquin she's on. Whatever arrangement her and that corpse have is a form of soul thievery in the eyes of Nagash. Basically, the soul is being bound or kept on the mortal plane. It should go to Shyish. So he's found the thief. Reikenor goes in for the kill and is repulsed by lightning that the Pontifex fires in him. He just deeply underestimated her. He takes a nice wound for it, and he retreats. Now, the sidebar here is interesting because it kind of fills in the gap, because I read this at first, and I was like, wow, that was a very anticlimactic battle. But essentially what this was Reikenor was going for an early knockout. He just wanted to snipe the Soul Thief to knock that, to check that off of his list, and then he can go back to his ritual. But she made it difficult. He underestimated her. But he's not really upset about it. Because remember, he's going to light this whole mountain on fire, and they're going to go with it. So it's like, he really cares. I didn't need to knock out this errand first. I could come on the back end and do it. And so he departs, and there's initially a lot of cheering, right? All the different cities of Sigmar folks like, oh my gosh, we beat them. We finally destroyed death and stuff like that. But the Pontifex has a plan. She's going to take her most faithful followers into the heart of the Ashenmount, and they need to shut the gate, using their faith as their shield and sword. The idea is that the rest of the crew, the cities of Sigmar, will stay up here and keep things clear of Nighthaunt. Which makes sense, right? Like, okay, well, we can't just let them come through the door with impunity. We have to go shut the dang door. Let's just do that right now as a counterattack. I think that makes perfect sense. However, I will slip in here that for me, as someone who's just a casual reader of these books, what I'm going to describe to you, the last part of this story, felt very rushed. And there's no other way to communicate that other than just saying it flatly. Pontifex Zenestra goes into the mountains to try and purify it. The heat inside of them is incredible because Reikenor is using his Pyregeist to basically make all those Realmstone mining pipes explode with fire in a mass ritual. Zenestra finds the Realm Gate to Shyish where all this was going down. Reikenor is struck down pretty easily as Zenestra unleashes a prayer of faith and fortitude on her followers. The Grimhaler and his army are driven back through the realm gate, and Zenestra falls to the ground, passed out again, now for the second time in this book, and like the fifth time in this campaign series. This girl loves her naps, and I'm not opposed to it. And that's really where the story of the Crusade ends. Like I said, it was a bit rushed. They yada-yada'd that pretty hard, in my opinion. But there's still a lot to talk about here, so I would like to discuss why is this cool. Well, in my last video, I felt like the Akshi side of the Crusade stopped doing things, or at least in the last Crusade book, they stopped doing things. And so I do feel like this was meant to address some of that, like having half of the Akshi side be in Hammerhall was awesome. But again, here we still aren't going forward very much. They founded the city of Embergard, which was an interesting one. Because if the colony can work, it'll be massive. She's established it as a place of faith, so maybe at some point we can work up to the Hallowed Knights getting a keep there or something. But really all that happened, like in a narrative sense, as far as, you know, moving the plot of the Crusades forward, all that really happened was the book opened and Zenestra went, "This place is good," and then it's like several pages of, "No, it was most certainly not good." That said, I have a lot of speculation as to what this is about. And I'm going to offer no spoilers, but GW has already shown us that the fourth edition of the game will mostly be happening in Akshi, and so I'm very curious about how this city plant works into that. So entertaining if nothing else, but also I want to know why Nagash and the Nighthaunt had such a interest in this mountain. Because we all know Skaven, you know, from the trailers of fourth, it seems like they're going to be the main enemy. It's very interesting to me. When you think about the wilds of Akshi, so many armies have various reasons to be there. It's just so cool, and I'm very interested to see how they bring them all together, and if and how Embergard fits into that. So friends, I would love to know your thoughts. What do you think of the Crusade of Fire Akshi? And let me ask you this, who has it worse? The people back at Hammerhall or these guys? I'm going to say Hammerhall, I think, has it worse. Because trying to fight off all the armies on the outside while you're also being poisoned with dead people water sounds like a bummer. And so does like finding your home of safety and then having like a whole gateway to hell underneath it. I guess they're both kind of downers, but I'm gonna go with the one that's less like immediately gross with the dead bodies bobbing and all. I would love to hear your thoughts and your arguments. Who has it worse, Hammerhall Akshi or the Crusade of Fire that left from it? Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below, and we're going to continue this story with the overarching narrative of the Ghyran Crusade starting tomorrow. So thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming. Welcome, wargamers, to the titillating battlefields full of hedonism in the mortal realms, because today we are talking about Dawnbringers Book 5, Shadow of the Crone, and this is video 3 of its coverage. Now, in the last videos in this particular series, Shadow of the Crone, we've been talking about things going on in Hammerhall Akshi. Or rather, Akshi in general. The first video was about Hammerhall, the second video is about the Crusade over there. But in this video and its next one, we're going to pivot our point of view and go over to the Ghyran side of the Crusade. And this side is a little bit different in that we don't have an idea of what's going on at Hammerhall Ghyran right now. It just stays with the Crusade, but that being said, it is my favorite part of the book. The Ghyran side generally is. And the story picks right up after we exit the mountain region where we met Ushurin, the Mortarch of Delusion, which was basically their entire plotline in the last book. They are in the section of Ghyran known as the Neck, coming out of the more confined regions of it. And our story picks up on the other side of that mountain range, where essentially the rest of the Crusade seemed to have make it through, but not unscathed. And that's something that's hit up real fast and plays into just about everything going on with the Ghyran side of this book. People are not okay after having interacted with the Flesh Eater courts, and we'll get into why as our story unravels. So as I said before, the Crusade manages to kind of reconnect after they had to break up to get to the other side of Ushurin's home, but folks aren't doing well. Nearly everyone in this section of the Crusade is suffering from nightmares. Some men don't sleep and only murmur to themselves in the corners. They're pursued endlessly by ghouls Because even though they were allowed to leave, if you remember the great scene with Gormain, who was like, this was not your fault, you were just pawns, but go ahead and go through, right? They were allowed to leave, but that doesn't mean that we can't kind of drive you crazy. And anyone who wants to stay can. Which is a very different proposition than go forth and be unharmed. So the crusade is just kind of dealing with a lot of after effects, at least psychological effects, of going through the region. And now, let's talk about Thorian. This is the marshal of the entire crusade, the boss in charge. She is going through a bit of a Pokemon evolution of her own. Over this campaign series, she has tapped more and more into latent magic that she has within herself unexpectedly, the deeper into Ghiran that they seem to get. The further they go, the more evident this magic becomes. From bursts of life magic to healing injuries, she's changing. One of her hands even is said to be stuck kind of like in a twisted gnarl. Her skin is becoming tougher and cracked like it's bark. And an hour or so in sunlight can restore her more than a night's sleep. Meaning, as we talked about before, the Dame of Leaves is becoming an icon of the crusade, just as much as its military leader. What this means for her in the long run, no idea, but I'm excited to learn. With her crusade kind of reconstituting itself, the Marshal's next goal is in sight. It's a small fort known as Nathwaite's Crossing. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. It's a small defended township that was built on a region known as the Vorel Dam. In short, there's a big river. It's called the Vorel River. The first crusades to reach this area before had settled in this place to build and defend a bridge, thinking more crusades would come and basically like, oh, we'll hold the door open for you. They man the bridge to make sure nothing comes across except for cities of Sigmar, and they act as a resupply station when the crusade reaches them. Despite that, very few crusades have ever come to Nathwaite's Crossing, this little town that they built. Now, you and I, as kind of with the omniscient narrator voice here, we know it's because the Ossiarch Bone Reapers and the Flesh Eater Courts basically cordoned off the entire area. They thought they were going ahead first and other crusades would be right behind them, but they never came. They essentially didn't know that they were cut off from Hammerhall. Now that's kind of fallen apart with the crusade punching through the Ossiarch Bone Reaper lines and, basically unfettering Usharin from Neferata. There's a lot of changes happening, so it's a bit unsure of what's going on next, but the scouts return and say, hey, thumbs up. It's safe, it's secure, they're ready to aid the Dawnbringer crusade, and this provides our heroes with a brief bit to re-equip, rearm, and resupply. So the Ghiran crusade parks itself at Nathwaite's Crossing and gets some much needed rest. But Thorian wants to kind of keep things moving, basically saying, we're really close to our goal, guys. I don't want to lose the momentum of our crusade because this place is already colonized. They don't need us. Let's keep going. And this is important because at this point where everybody else but the military arm is resting, at some point during the wilderness of Ghiran, the Marshal had ordered that no one drink water from the natural sources, only drink it from our founts of Aqua Ghiranus, because in the Flesh Eater Quartz Mountains, she had suspected that there was something wrong with the water. The people who drank it just kind of went nuts. Well, once they got to town, everyone can refill with fresh water that's not dependent on the Aqualith distribution. So like her crusade really needs to hydrate, restore stocks, and now they have access to fresh water they didn't for a while. While they are all doing that, Thorian and the leaders of Nathwaite's Crossing go over like updated maps and information. Since these guys have colonized this dam, they've scouted the area and they have updated information that they can give Thorian. Based on the kind of logistics that we talked about in yesterday's video with the Crusade of Fire of like, how far can we reasonably push people? What means of transportation do we still have? What's available to us? Basically, after going through all of that, Thorian lands on the place that she wants to found her next crusade, or basically found the city. It's nestled in a cove of turquoise kind of mountain rock, replete with natural resources and natural defenses, and there's even a realm gate there. So we're like right at the precipice of being done. Like it's like the last stretch. It's not even that far from here, but it's, everything that they need to be able to start building this next big city. So since her civilian portion of the crusade is still hydrating or equipping, all that kind of stuff, Thorian takes her military elements forward. Basically, the idea is we're going to scout this place out. I'm kind of unclear of how far ahead it is, but I assume it's some distance. It seems like it takes 2 to 3 days to arrive there. And the idea is she's going to clear it all out with her army so that the rest of the crusade, once they're ready to go, can walk right in and set up, which is a great idea. When they arrive at the scene, they are confronted with a site called, I believe it's pronounced Gilnarod's Gate. It is a realm gate that sounds really cool. It is imagine a massive flower that is, and you walk into the center of it, it kind of wisps you away. It sounds real pretty, but this is functionally a realm gate. Things that go in and out of this flower are taken presumably to some other place in Kieran. It's not really specified too harshly as to where it goes. But unfortunately, there's some people hanging around this realm gate, and it's actively being corrupted by a host of Hedonites of Slaanesh, led by Lord Zythistikos, is how I'm gonna pronounce it. And we gain a fun bit of backstory about these guys. The Slaanesh army, that is. And this is as the fight is going on between Thorian and them. They are a Slaanesh warband that is directly in service of Glutos Orcillion, the Grand Gourmand of They Who Thirsts. You can see my dedicated video on him, but he is a dude who loves to sample the rare and exotic things of the realms. He likes to eat everything, eat and drink everything, always wanting the next level of experience or thrill that comes with trying something new. And this guy, Orcillion, has heard about a vintage of wine that, wouldn't you know it, is the rarest and best wine that there is. It's called King's Blood. And so Glutos alerts all of his warlords, anyone under him, Chaos warbands alike. Okay, specifically Slaanesh ones would be more interested, but anyone who can bring me King's Blood is gonna get a fat reward. And Lord Zythistikos is here to take him up on that offer. And more so than being interrupted, Lord Z, I'm going to call him Z because it's just a lot to kind of chew through that name, he smells a familiar aroma. Whatever sample of King's Blood, maybe he had an empty bottle that Glutos had, he basically kind of put in front of his warlord, sort of like letting a bloodhound sniff a sample of something and then lead you to it. Their sensations, their senses are so acute that they can tell something is nearby. He knows the smell of King's Blood. They came here to find it, and now he smells it in the air, and he's looking around, and all he sees are a bunch of humans running at him. Whatever that small sample of King's Blood that Glutos had, these guys reek of it. So he's intrigued. This is the Slaanesh warlord, after all. Because it's this idea of well, what I came for came to me. And so a fight ensues between cities of Sigmar and the Hedonites of Slaanesh, and it's actually a pretty cool one because I don't feel like we get enough narrative depictions of what it's like to be attacked by the Hedonites of Slaanesh. For example, this fight is actually really fun to read. There's a rolling pink and purple fog that descends across the battlefield. It disorients fighters, and then the Hedonites race into the center with their lines. And basically, instead of confronting them toe-to-toe and fighting in the fog, they use it to kind of weave around and stab in the back and fire from range. Our Lord Z here goes and basically raids the supply wagons. Instead of the fight, he just goes way off to the side, grabs a bunch of canisters of their water, and is like, ha-ha, got what I came for, and busts out of there. The kind of idea we get from our omniscient narrative perspective is the Hedonites had no chance of winning this fight. They're just more of a scouting crew than anything else. But they got what they came for, which is all that matters, and so Lord Z ducks out. Now, a lesser person would see this as a Chaos warlord running, but Lord Z sees it as bravely delegating the responsibility of rearguard action to his men. Which you could honestly do no less for the Lord Glutos himself, if we're being honest. And with this seemingly minor victory, or at least an easy one, relative to everything that's happened, Thorian has finally arrived at the site of her new city. But of course, that's not the end of this story, friends, because we have two things we need to discuss. A clue and a sidebar. The clue was that Glutos' boys are here for King's Blood, and they smell it all over these Dawners. He steals their water. He gets it. He's letting them know that something's wrong, and it's about what you're drinking. The second thing to mention here is a cutscene. Usharan, the Mortarch of Delusion, is in a recess atop the River Vorel, and he opens his wound, basically like that where he got shot in the leg from the last book, opens that wound into a Ghiran spring, and downstream from it, animals that drink the water of the river go mad. They start attacking one another. Some of them just die. We get the idea that he is poisoning the entire Vorel River. Now, let's talk about why is this cool. I chose this as a point break for our story for a very specific reason, because the next series of events happen real rapid fire, and they are so cool, but they're very distinct from the Hedonites battle that happened just now. I like this because, quite frankly, this crusade between this and the Fire one has continuously been more intriguing. I love Thorian. Please make a model of her. No matter what her apotheosis looks like, it's going to be awesome. And this was a fun one because it splits up in a way that it makes sense. Everything till this point makes perfect sense. Why this settlement was right there, why they were ready with supplies, why they were so welcoming. The fact that they, have scouted other areas to find great places for cities. Thorian's led right there. They clean the place of all the Chaos folks there. Like, it's all making so much sense. And that's the most fun thing, is when stories have a twist or an epic conclusion, and it made sense the entire way. There was no massive leaps in logic. This is one of those. And as I said before, I just don't think there's enough depictions of what it's like on the receiving end of a Hedonites of Slaanesh attack, because of course, there's always the memes about everything's for pleasure and, self-gratification, and people take that in really weird ways. But, like, if you're on the receiving end, there's no pleasure involved there. So what are you actually seeing people do to themselves and others? It's just kind of a wacky thing. It never gets explored very much for a lot of reasons. And so seeing that depicted as, like, it's a very disorienting thing. Like, disorientation is not the word I would normally think of. But it's a powerful tool on the battlefield for sure, especially if you're a smaller force like the Hedonites were in this one, and your objective isn't to win militarily, it's just, seize the objective, which in this case was Kingsblood, the water. I'd love to know your thoughts about that down below. Tell me, and we'll jump into the conclusion of the Ghiran side. It's a very interesting story, I promise, all the way back at Nathwaite's Crossing in tomorrow's video. Thank you so much for watching and listening. I will catch you next time, friends. Happy wargaming. Welcome, Wargamers, to the totally safe, nothing to worry about here corners of the mortal realm, because today we are talking about Dawnbringers Book 5, Shadow of the Crone, and this is video 4 of its coverage. In my last video, we talked about Thorian's crusade reaching very much near the final stretch of their journey. They reached the safety of a city called Nathwaite's Crossing, which was built on the Thoril River. It's kind of a dam kind of architecture with a city that's kind of built into the side to defend said dam. And while everyone was resting and recovering, Thorian decided, I don't want to lose momentum, and so after looking at updated maps, selects a spot for her next city of Sigmar, takes her military arm to go out and clear it. But she leaves in doing so a detachment of her crusade back at town to, like I said, resupply, re-equip, all that kind of stuff. And while the locals have been friendly, they aren't really too eager to hang out with the Dawners. People stay locked up in their homes, they don't talk to strangers, and very quickly madness descends upon this little township while Thorian is away. And that's really going to be the crux of today's story. We're going to conclude the Ghiran side of the crusade, what happened back at Nathwaite's Crossing, and how does the founding of the next city of Sigmar actually go. But let's neither dilly nor dally here, friends. As we hinted at in my last video, there is clearly some kind of corrupting force that poisons the waters of Ghiran. And I think between, whatever's happening here and Nurgle just generally liking Ghiran a lot, don't drink the water there. Just don't. Can we all agree, if you go to Ghiran somehow, don't drink the water? But the things that, these effects are having begin very subtly. People go missing. The locals of Nathwaite's Crossing and the cities of Sigmar forces that are a part of the crusade start to realize that they're losing folks. Sure, initially some are chalked up to either desertion or maybe a miscount on the part of the census, trying to corral all the troops together. Maybe they're just missing a few folks. But when one soldier kills 2 comrades and gouges the eyes out of his officer, things become very apparent. There's something wrong at Nathwaite's Crossing. Now, at one point, the leader of the Crusade forces in the town, the guy who Thorian left in charge of this little section here, his name is Sub-Marshal Vandis, or Vandice. And he's going around trying to investigate what's happening to his men, what's going on at Nathwaite's Crossing. And at one point, as he's very despondent over all these weird rash of violent attacks is going on, he goes to his tent, and he is greeted by a Lumineth Realm Lord hiding in the shadow. He doesn't want to be seen, he doesn't want to be a dignitary or a representative, he wants to meet the leader one-on-one in secret. This elf claims to be of the Temple of Indrasil, the river elves that we recently talked about in the Warcry set. And to Sub-Marshal Vandice, he basically explains everything that's going on. The river here, the Vorel River, is tainted and corrupted. Your host, Evander Nathwaite, who the kind of the founder lineage of the town, is corrupted and is in service to a dark patron. And the Indrasil, Lumineth is essentially saying, like, he's bringing information of these folks were in the middle of expanding the Vorel Dam, and Nathwaite kept declining the aid that Vandice was offering. They're stuck in the town, the least we could do is send a few guys to help you. And the elf explains the reason he keeps saying no is because they're not really building a dam, dude. It's a channel. Remember, these are the river elves. They're going up and down the major thoroughfares of the realms. And what he is seeing, and then trying to basically articulate to our human commander here, is the plans of these guys here in this town is not to stop the river with a dam, but to channel it downstream specifically to where Thorian wants to plant her new city of Sigmar and eventually further into Ghyran. Whatever's happening here, he wants to happen everywhere. And so, Vandice grabs his best men, at least the ones that he thinks, have been corrupted the least, or they at least seem the most sane, and he makes for the dam. Basically saying, okay, I don't know anything about what this Lumineth is saying, he ducked out really quickly, let's go see the dam, right? If it's what he's saying is true, it should be pretty obvious that this is not functioning as a dam. They make their way there, and they're greeted by Nathwaite, again, that leader of the city who's all corrupted, and he basically confirms this. And his argument is, you injured the Summer King. It's his blood from the wounds you caused that is running down this river. Who would dare shoot the Summer King? And of course, all those things are true, right? We know from the previous book that the cities of Sigmar were kind of like manipulated into firing upon Usharin. It's his blood from that wound that is pouring into the Thorol River. And so there's this weird kind of like martyr complex that they have, like, oh my gosh, his blood's running in the river. You made him bleed. You have to be stopped. And Nathwaite attacks. And the scene here, just to kind of back out for a little bit, is really awesome. It's on the side of the dam. So there's a man-made lake on one side, which now Vandice can see is full of dead bodies and gore, likely all of his missing people, just like the same corrupting type of ritual we saw back in Hammerhall Akshi in the same book. On the other side is a river being, gradually directed. They're trying to point it towards a different stream that will go forth and poison Thorian's new city. During the battle, Vandice is knocked all over the edge, and only to be saved once again by a figure who swoops in low and plucks him right before he falls into the gore pool, which is the second time this exact same scene has happened in this book, and it's none other than the same shadow crone, Crethusa. She snags Sub-Marshal Vandice and flies for hours all the way out to Thorian's location. And in doing so, she essentially just ditches all of the cities of Sigmar units and supplies, takes the one person who Thorian would trust as a witness to her. And presumably here, the cities of Sigmar units that were left in that town are destroyed. But our camera kind of pans and now settles firmly on Thorian, who's chatting with Crethusa, with Vandice there to confirm the treachery that happened at the dam. Now, this was the most, MacGuffin-y of all the things ever. Like, I didn't see a reason why Crethusa had to be the one to join, like, to swoop in and do the literal copy-paste of the Callus and Toll scene where she saves the day of a guy falling into a flesh-eater court pit of gore. But, whatever, we got here. Thorian knows what's up, and she sets out immediately. Crethusa is there saying, we're going to be there to aid you. I have forces nearby. We'll attack at the same time. We have to shut this, corruption down because, of course, like we mentioned before with the Daughters of Cain and whatever the motivations of the new Crone Herald are, they have a vested interest in making sure cities aren't ruined. They live there too, so it's like, I get it. And all of these events lead up, after like a day or two, to an epic event known as the Battle of Vorel Dam. As Thorian's forces crest a mountain along the cliffside overlooking the dam, they see the extent of their enemy, and this is probably one of the best perspectives we get of just how rotten things have gotten, where you have like waves upon waves of flesh eater courts scrabbling towards them, just in like literal human waves. There's corpses all over the place. The water coming out of the channel now, because it's not really a dam, is like fetid and all nasty. And at this point, we have the cities of Sigmar and some Cainite allies that Crethusa brought with her, hacking and slashing into these. Now, the scene is really cool because the witch elves go through these ghouls with ease. Like, honestly, it's probably the most accurate game to story imagining ever of just witch elves going straight through a packs of ghouls. While the cities of Sigmar units kind of formed a defensive perimeter and just pointed all of their cannons that they could at the channel, the dam, the structure, whatever you want to call it. And while they were all fighting well, there's just not enough of the forces of order because the flesh eater courts continue to pour out across the river, crawling up from different surfaces, out of walls. And now, all of a sudden, there's a big shriek and a gore warden is circling the sky. It's this character, Sire Grimlock, that was directing Nathwaite and his town from the shadows. Remember we talked about with the Callus and Toll story, it seems like the king's blood or whatever corrupting presence is in the water will start to change people, and then a nearby ghoul king or some, actual vampire type thing of the flesh eater courts will sense that there are people nearby, come in and take control. And at this point, Sire Grimlock, he's got his boy Nathwaite on the dam. Everything's looking awesome. He thinks, I have this. We're going to wipe out the last of these city forces, get back to corrupting the river. The city of Sigmar cannons are struggling to chew through this dam, and the tide of ghouls is endless. So again, he's looking at this like, I've got this on lock. He flies up high to take kind of a full view of the battlefield and just kind of revel in his own mastery of the whole thing. But this was a very arrogant mistake to make, because Shadow Crone Crethusa flies at him and attacks. And they have their own like Dragon Ball Z boss fight across the battle below. Or up above it, I mean. It's pretty cool. They go back and forth. You don't see a whole lot of flying enemies and attackers in AOS. And in the end, Crethusa shoots her feather darts out and clips him in the eye, the heart, and the throat. And he falls dead from the sky. So even though our forces of good guys are outnumbered, they just sniped out the Flesh Eater Court hero. All those nobility points are gone. He falls dead. Evander Nathwaite, Lord of Nathwaite's Crossing at this point, saw his lord fall in battle, and as he watched him fall, his vision blurred and distorted. The delusion had weakened, at least for him. Now, we talk about this before when people are affected by the Flesh Eater Court's kind of like delusion. Sometimes their vision will flicker. They'll see what's really happening, and it'll kind of be interspersed with what the delusion is. Looking at this dead horror, where moments ago he saw a majestic knight, he realized in a flash at least some aspect of what had happened. He is now standing on the dam as an army of cannibal madmen under his command surge to kill his allies, and he has himself one of those like, pause, how did we get here kind of moments. He's looking around at all these little maniacs, and he sees a cart of explosives at the far end of the bridge, or this dam construct. They use these demo charges when building the dam into the cliff edge, and in a fit of final devotion to Sigmar, now that his mind has been cleared at least momentarily, he throws his torch at the cart. Now, Thorian and the rest of the city's armies don't actually necessarily see this happening. This is just for our benefit. All they see is that one moment her cannons are doing almost nothing against this dam, and the next the whole thing erupts into fire and steam and water. The waters flow freely, the man-made lake is drenched essentially pretty much instantly, and they're no longer being redirected towards her people or anyone else downstream. In doing so, the Flesh Eater Court forces, at least the bulk of the army, is washed away. I mean, like, they're literally crossing the dam to get to the city's guys, and they get pushed downriver. For the rest of them, they're just dumbfounded because their leadership is gone. Like, not just the Gore Warden, but now Nathwaite, all of it. And it falls apart from there. And this is realistically where the scene goes black. Thorian, now confident in the founding of her new city, names it Verdigris. Thus concludes the narrative section of the Shadow of the Crone campaign book. Now let's take a step back and ask, as we always do in these videos, why is this cool? There's a few things in this particular part of the story that I liked. First of all, the Lumineth Realm Lords guy, which I found out later, is that he really just wanted a distraction. He assumed he was going to go talk to the leader of the city's Sigmar forces, and he was going to get ticked. No matter what the Lumineth guy said, he was going to go investigate, and they were going to cause a bunch of trouble. What they don't know is that somewhere up or downstream, the Idrillan Lumineth are already working hard to purify the river. Because no part of this story has anything to do with actually stopping the source of the corruption, just so that it doesn't affect the rest of the cities. The idea for the city of Verdigris is awesome. Like the idea of it's built into this three-way turquoise mountain range where it has lots of mineral riches, built-in defenses, sites of already arcane power. They have their own realm gate. Like it just seems perfect. And what I think this story does a great job of doing, just like the story we had with Callus and Toll of seeing what mass infection of Flesh Eater Court stuff looks like, this does a great job of that, but less for a massive city and more for a small township. Like Hammerhall has, the distinction of having extra units that can go into the waterway and find what's going on, whereas, all of this town is so small. They don't have any underground catacombs. It's all just in your face. So more depictions of that I think is always good. The battles here were clear and decisive. A new city was founded, and I am filled with all kinds of joy because I just like Ghyran. I like the artwork that comes out of there. Thorian's Crusade has consistently been my favorite. One of the things that we get, though, from the founding of this new city is that they are not stoked about Crethusa, the Shadow Crone. But they cannot deny that it would have been a defeat without her intervention. And so my sense that I get from this is, I wonder if this means Crethusa is looking to found her Temple of Cain in the new city. Basically, like, we're going to establish a new Daughters of Cain temple that is fundamentally different than any other ones because we don't worship Morathi, and also, quite frankly, they are just generally nicer than a lot of the other Daughters of Cain factions are depicted as being. Crethusa seems to help a lot more. But it would make, her actions would make a lot of sense if there was kind of a selfish ulterior motive of, we need a city that will take us in and no questions asked. I will say, stepping back from the book as a whole, I really expected to learn more about the Crone Order, as they describe it, of like this series of Daughters of Cain that kind of splintered off from the rest. As is, I feel like they're simply saying, yeah, well, we don't all like Morathi, but are there any plans to do anything about that? Or sub-factions or anything, or, just ways of articulating that more than Edgelord Winggirl is kind of out there. It's ambiguous. So I just wish there was a little bit more meat on the bone. It seems like a fantastic character to lead that kind of thing. And I'm very intrigued by the premise. I just didn't feel like it was very well developed in this book, even though it has Shadow of the Crone on the cover. It's also important to remember that as they're kind of factoring in who could be allies and who could live here, maybe Crethusa is trying to get a spot in the city, that the city is not safe. Like, they made it there, but in doing so, like locally by scouting, they've already found Maggotkin of Nurgle, Cruel Boys are out there, and more. The church is hard at work purifying the area of Slaanesh and laying the cornerstones of this bastion, but it's far from secure. And if you're curious as to what the initial founding of a city looked like, the book Dominion by Darius Hinks actually has a fantastic breakdown of how they found a city with, the metaliths. They unload stuff, use them as natural fortifications. There's a priority of creating concentric circles of defense, first against ethereal things, then against physical threats. It's really cool. But friends, that is going to do it for the Shadow of the Crone. Another book where I didn't feel like the story moved terribly much, but I will say, yet again, the Ghyran side to me is much more interesting. Thorian getting pulled in so many different directions of like trying to be proactive, leaving her troops to go out and secure the area, being weighed against, there's no safe places in the mortal realms. You can't just leave half your crusade somewhere and expect things to go well. All of those make for fantastic things to cover, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about them. Let me know in the comments down below, and I will hang out with you there. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends. Welcome, Wargamers, to the savage endings of the Mortal Realms. Today, we are talking about the 6th and final book in the Dawnbringers series, the Hounds of Chaos, as requested by everyone under the sun, because most folks don't really want to buy it with the sword of Damocles that is 4th edition hanging above us. But all of that being said, Games Workshop sent me a copy, and I am so thankful to them for being able to share this exciting story, long after the publication of this book ends, all joking aside. We've seen our twin-tailed crusade set out, one from Akshi, one from Ghiran, and today we are going to learn the final fates of these fledgling bastions, as well as the cities that sent them. Because if you remember, things weren't exactly fun in Hammerhall specifically. And we have a lot of ground to cover because if you have seen any of the previews for 4th edition, we know that Skaven are usurping and they've blown up parts of Akshi. So we have a lot of, getting from point A to point B, as it were. But on to the campaign itself. This book, like the others, starts with a summary of what's going on in both crusades. But as it's the last book in the series, this section of the book feels more like the end season of a show where there's a lot of flashbacks. They do a really actually very good 2-page summary of all the books that came before this. Just kind of hot dropping like the different enemies they faced, the locations they went to, like Fort Gardas and stuff. It was just a really compelling synopsis. But it doesn't really add any new insight, and so we're going to skip past that section of the book. I want to jump right into the Crusade stories themselves, and we're going to start this in Ghiran. Certainly the side of the Crusade that I have been more interested in over the course of the series. The city here, founded by our campaign heroine Isilia Thorian, was named Verdigris. It's built into some very tall, sharp, mountainous structures that act as a natural bunker. And the city construction is coming along at the point of our story. This is maybe a season or two after the events of the last book. And so we get a few insights into how it's coming along, like the mobile defenses on the big metaliths are now in position. There's farming that's starting up, some crude smithing. Like the city is fortifying and preparing itself to be a bastion. But one thing they're having a hard time with, and what I believe will be a defining feature of this city going forward, is the wind. Whatever natural wind tunnel or funnel this mountain valley creates, this is some intensely windy areas. So that's kind of like their geographical thing they have to contend with, which a lot of the cities have. They have some kind of geographical thing that makes it so difficult for them to survive, but it's awesome. And so, knowing that our city is safe for now, let's take an aerial snapshot of the situation in Ghiran. Right, Thorian went from being the Grand Marshal of the Crusade to the city commander, of course. She's deeply revered by her troops as an icon, both spiritually and militarily. But she's not doing great. We had talked about in the previous stories, she started to tap into this kind of like earth magic, druidic power that she has throughout the books, and it saved her a couple times. Well, whatever she tapped into, she is now paying the full price for. So from her hand, one of her hands, and then her torso and below, the skin of it has become like a tough bark material. And so it hurts her to move. She's still functional. She kind of hides it, but she is not in a good place. Her city, Verdigris, is fairly well defended, as we said. Although Crethusa, the Crone Seer of the Daughters of Cain, took her entourage with her and left. There's still plenty of cavalry and defenders to hold the walls, but they are far from complacent. Every single day of this camp is militarizing for the next big chaos attack because they already have indications that their area is not safe. There's Wildercorps scouts patrolling that go missing. The woods are getting more and more dangerous just with animal attacks, unseasonal storms, and there is an overwhelming sense from all of the mystics and the seers within the city itself that there's a dark cloud moving their way. So like everyone's kind of sensing there's a calm right now, but something bad is coming our direction. And this in the story is where our perspective changes. Okay, we're going to pan over, if we're using the camera Michael Bay style, we're just going to do a quick flash pan over to a new character on the scene, Abraxia. Essentially, Archaon's chief of the Vanguard. She has been deployed to the area to bring this new city down low, and she has a team of Vanguard with her under her command to do so. And the scene with her actually opens of her stabbing a steel helm dude with her spear named Gorbolga, but I will admit, as I am reading this book very quickly, it definitely read it as Gabagool. I love that too. And this, as was mentioned more than a few times at the Adepticon preview, is a Varanite-tipped spear. It mutates anything it touches, and while we've heard that said a bunch, the actual written description here is brutal and I love it. Let me read this to you. Let me read what this spear does to people, okay? The steel helm screamed as the accursed lance punched through his gut. It was not until that weapon flashed with unnatural hues, however, that the true horror began. Fanged maws ripped open across the man's body. Tongues wrinkled from his eye sockets. The flesh and muscle of his legs unpeeled from the bone like bloody stalks of grain. The soldier's screams took on a bestial quality as he thrashed against the weapon that pinned him to the ground and racked his flesh with mutative fire. Then, the spear was yanked free, and he was allowed to perish under the weight of his own defilement. Guys, we made a lot of jokes about Abraxia, but I'm going to say, I love her. But what's she doing here, okay? Well, Abraxia has orders to rouse the Dark Oath tribes from the region under her belt and use them as cannon fodder to build an army and attack the city of Verdigris. And then basically we'll throw the bodies at them, and then me and my Varen Guard will come in for the final kill, penetrate the defenses, and just wipe this place off the map. And so when Thorian is seeing that scouts are going missing and things seem uneasy, what she doesn't know is just outside of her view within the forest are some of the most powerful Chaos champions calling thousands to their banners regularly. And when I say thousands, what I'm talking about is, yes, there's Dark Oath tribes, but this is the Everchosen, and these are Varen Guard. They can take command of any other Chaos warband out there. They can walk up to a Khorne warband and be like, "You're following me, bro," and they will follow them. If for nothing else, you know that the Varen Guard's going to lead you to a good fight where you can please Khorne. And that goes for the same for all the Chaos Gods. When the Everchosen's emissary comes to you, you say yes. So this is a true Chaos undivided army. And they're all called upon through visions and seers and all this kind of stuff. Just kind of brought together. It's a rabble, but it's a big, big rabble. And it's not long before the horizon of Thorian's forest is covered in war machines, dudes, and Varen Guard. They have like the big, I can't remember what they're called, not trebuchets, but the big towers that you put against the wall and then dudes can climb up inside of it, that kind of thing. Now, it's clear from the outset that they don't have the defenses necessary for this kind of an assault, right? They can handle Chaos warbands here and there, like the Slaaneshi one they had to clear out to get this place, that kind of thing. But this is a different animal. Thorian dispatches her knights as a defensive action, but honestly, it's in vain, and she knows it. Like, the idea was to kind of set the line of engagement far forward. This Chaos army against them is way too big to fight outside the city. Abraxia makes her epic charge. There's a really cool scene where she's hacking and slashing through knights. The same thing, she's mutating them as they go. It's wicked and wild. And it's about here that she makes the call for the final charge towards the gate. That big push where everyone, gets in the siege equipment and advances forward, and they rush the walls, they bring the ladders, all that stuff. And right as she's about to do that, a different horn rings out and beats her to it. Except this is not a Slaves to Darkness horn. From the back lines of Abraxia's army, a new fighter enters the battlefield. The Thorns of the Hunter God Kurnothi rejoin the crusade. This is the Evergreen Hunt led by Balthanos, who we already met earlier in this campaign series, and he essentially erupts from the woods and cuts this Chaos horde in half. So like this long river of dudes was coming towards the city, they divide it in half. So now you have the city, half the Chaos army, the Sylvaneth army, and then the far side, the other Chaos army. It's just split. And they're using the patented, Sylvaneth hit and run attacks. There's vines bursting from the grounds to eat dudes or wreck siege equipment. Whole branches just swing down as like tree lords phase in between them. Forest sprites are popping up and going for people's jugulars like a bunch of goblins. And just like I said when the last Balthanos scene happened, these are some of the legitimately coolest Sylvaneth fight scenes that have been written. Because they don't ever have the numbers to outright murder the whole Chaos host. But what Balthanos did was divide the army at the worst moment. When the forward elements were charging just out of reinforcement range, he cut the neck. And Abraxia is at the front, totally left in the lurch between cities of Sigmar and Sylvaneth. And this is kind of where it falls apart. Some of her men continue the charge just like she had planned, because she, was about to give the order. They know what's up, because they were told, as Varengard, Archaon says he wants the city, so that's the plan. I don't care if Abraxia turns around, she can do whatever she wants. I was told by the boss, and if I do this, the boss will like me more than her. Meanwhile, Abraxia is trying to respond to a changing battlefield, like a leader does, but only some of the Varengard care to listen. And because of that, the attack falters. She gets into a huge fight with Balthanos. It's actually quite cool. And in this fight, she is essentially poisoned by Balthanos. And her Slaves to Darkness army is shattered into disarray, and she makes a tactical retreat. Back at her camp, she uses a seer to ring up Archaon, essentially. And he, very adequately explains his displeasure and notices that there's some kind of curse or poison flowing through her. And it's kind of driving her crazy. She's beginning to have trouble distinguishing reality. For a second, I couldn't tell if they were trying to make it sound like a Flesh Eater Court type thing where her vision kind of fades between visions, but it's a little bit more like she just can't keep herself out of a dream. And Archaon says to her, I know how to cure that, actually. I sense that on you, and the cure it's very enigmatic of him. He says, you have to steal fire from the liar gods themselves. You have to basically burn the curse away from you. And Abraxia kind of sits there for a second and thinks, and then she decides on a plan. And our scene kind of closes with her pitching this plan to Archaon. I know you want Verdigris destroyed, but just wait. I will give you one better. And our scene fades to black. Now, why was this cool? I like to end all my videos like this. This honestly was quite a bit of fun to read. It establishes the city a bit, where it's at in its construction. If you ever read Dominion by Darius Hanks, we kind of get a sense of how cities develop from that book. So they're well on their way, a season or two in, as we mentioned. And we do get a little bit of insight into how they've kind of been reeling and healing from the water being poisoned. Everyone's kind of on the mend. And I will be honest, I feel like Abraxia is a really cool character who is so much more than her lore blurb about her spear. Just in this book alone, we are introduced to her in a super metal way. We understand the struggle with authority that all Chaos Champions have, right? Each of these Varian Guard is a Chaos Lord in service to Archaon, but some take that as, I will only do what he literally tells me to do, and others are more than willing to play ball because they understand the authority, downline goes through Abraxia. And leading this demented herd of cats into the jaws of hell cannot be easy. So I feel like they do a good job of establishing her character and why I like her. And we see her strive and fail. But she has a kind of resolve and cunning that makes her interesting, right? Yeah, she failed this, and she didn't try to hide that fact from Archaon, but instead, it's like, you can punish me, or I can give you one better. We'll talk about what that is tomorrow. Now, the other character here is Balthanos felt like a wild card, and until I thought more on this, because he is in the area. Obviously, he was there with the other Crusade book, and since he is the god of the hunt, he is going to be pointed at whatever is the biggest threat in Ghiran, which is not that far from him, and the kind of army that Abraxia is summoning is exactly that. So initially I was like, well, why not just have him stay with the Crusade the whole time if he's just gonna pop back up? But honestly, even if he is just a wild pinball who's always hunting the biggest chaos thing in Ghiran, this is the biggest chaos thing in Ghiran at the moment of our story. So I was like, well, that's fair, I guess. Anyway, friends, I'd like to hear your thoughts down below. To be perfectly honest with you, there wasn't a whole lot of Verdigris action in this, and I was a bit perplexed by that. But I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Welcome, Wargamers, to the desperate rebirths of the Mortal Realms. Today, we are talking about Dawnbringers, Hounds of Chaos, Book 6, and Part 2 of my coverage on it. Now, we left off yesterday's story with the city of Verdigris almost falling. Abraxia had formed a horizon-darkening warband of various chaos tribes, and at the moment of her charge was interrupted by Balthanos and his Kurnothi hunt. With her siege foiled, Abraxia was injured, and basically this curse was messing up her mind, her senses, and distracting her constantly, but she's pushing through, and it all ended with an ominous deal with Archaon. I won't get you Verdigris, but I can do you one better. And today we're going to find out exactly what that plan is and uncover a whole bunch of inner tension amongst the forces of order as everyone becomes a little bit more dubious of the pointy ears. So, the city of Verdigris is safe. They had dark clouds all over that seemed to break apart once the forces of chaos were pushed away. Oddly enough, and this point really isn't brought back, Commander Thorian collapses at the end of this, and it might just be from a sense of exhaustion. This makes, I think, the 5th time she's collapsed in this book series, but whatever. ABF, always be fainting. But the question remains, where is Abraxia headed? The only clue she got from Archaon was that she needed fire from the liar gods. Unclear if it's a riddle or what. But, seeming to understand it, Abraxia unveils her pitch. I call it a pitch because his orders are still to take Verdigris, so you need to sway him for not killing you for failing. So again, that's the idea. She's trying to save her own life. There exists a place not far in Giran, another city of Sigmar that's been a thorn in Archaon's side, one that is actually renowned as a holy site for its constantly blazing fire of an altar. That is to say, the fire of the liar gods, perhaps. Where is this place? The city of Phoenicium. Now, friends, I had to put the book down. This is a trip, okay? Because they have not really developed the lore of this place in a meaningfully way, since they introduced it, but it's such a fascinating idea for a city. And so let's pivot and talk about Phoenicium and why it matters. In the Age of Myth, this place was already a megalopolis. We talked about the Age of Myth in other videos. It was the height of technology and arcane science, like everyone else back then. But then the Age of Chaos came, and the Chaos forces were having trouble breaking the defenses of the city. So instead, the Chaos army breaks open the mountain behind them. And this is where things get kind of wiggity and AOSified. You see, the mountain that Phoenicium was built into, as it is the realm of life, is one of many mountains that contains a ton of sap. Essentially, the forest above it kind of trickles the sap down, and these mountains and hills become like big bubbles of it. You wouldn't normally know it because it doesn't normally matter. But whenever Chaos forces did whatever they did to rupture the mountain, the sap poured out and rolled over this entire city. This is the equivalent of blowing a dam to destroy a riverside city. The sap rolls down the hill over the city like a silent avalanche. Now, fun fact for everybody, in the year 1919 here in our real world in Boston, there was a molasses factory that collapsed, and the area had what's known as the Great Boston Molasses Flood. And that is probably the closest thing that I can equate Phoenicium to. In Boston, it was jarring because with the amount of inertia it had behind it, molasses rolled over this area like a tidal wave. Right? It moves like water, but remember, it has the weight and density of an almost solid, and so it's tearing cars off the street, it's ripping at buildings. One person said that it was like getting hit by a concrete wall, and legit, a portion of Boston was sealed in molasses. People died. It was weird and tragic. But now imagine that same idea with tree sap. It rolls over the entire city and literally locks it in amber. One of the things that was in the city, locked in amber during the Age of Myth, is a temple that was built to honor the god beast, the Phoenix. It's a massive tower of a phoenix with a pyre of flame at its base. And this is an arcane flame, of course, the only place outside of Hysh to honor the god beast with an element of its power. Well, since the Age of Sigmar, elves have flocked here immediately. We mentioned in the Cities of Sigmar series that we did, that during the Age of Chaos, the forces in Azir were planning, how are we going to take back the realms, right? How can we work together to make that happen? And part of this city is just that. The elves wanted this place of worship ASAP. It was one of the first cities ever founded. In return, they'd offer their services of the Phoenix Guard to other factions, which is why any city of Sigmar can take the Phoenix Guard thematically, and the city was taken. Elven magics were used to begin excavation of portions of the city. Basically, they have to melt down the amber and kind of slide it away, and then they can rebuild what's already there. And they have now refortified this into a place and returned it to glory, and at its heart is still the Temple of the Phoenix. Now, in the city at the time of our story, coming back to our events of the Dawnbringer Crusade here, all of those things are still true, but what was once a totally unified bastion of order is beginning to fray. And I think this has more to do with telling us what's going around the rest of the realms than specifically this city. And we have to remember what the average Empire citizen thinks about on a daily basis. They are seeing the fall of cities like Anvilgard, or the reallocating to Marathi, as a pseudo-racial line in the sand. Right? This is a place of the elves. And cities like Phoenicium are put in a really weird headspace because just like Anvilgard, they also have an inordinate proportion of elves. Even though the elves in Anvilgard were more historically aligned with dark elves, and these elves are more historically aligned with high elves, it doesn't really matter. Are these guys going to secede too? The elf gods have their own priorities. Why not? Things don't really improve as Phoenicium had just sent out a great crusade of its own, and so only to fill those vacant spaces in their society are more elves. The Phoenix Guard are expanded, their authority now extends to civil matters as well as military, and a huge contingent of Lumineth realm lords enters the city. Again, no context for this makes this all seem very dubious. And while the city folk are thinking about all this, the skies begin to go black. The hellish army that was once at Verdigris is now on the doorstep of Phoenicium. Archaon, he liked the pitch. Abraxia is going to take the city, she's going to go to the pyre of the Phoenix and cure her curse, and finally destroy one of the seeds of hope. Now, taking the city head-on is suicide, because there's a reason it hasn't fallen yet. But Abraxia has a bold plan. Archaon is going to use his wizards and gaunt summoners to make pacts with demons of chaos, specifically ones that consume magic. An example of these, one variant might be the Screamers of Tzeentch. Basically anything that wants to attack the ether. If we're attacking an elven city or elven heavy populous city, there is sure to be arcane magics at us. We want someone who is eager to get into that fight. And they essentially pull the Stormcast Eternal trick of descending from the skies. Abraxia and her men go into a summoned portal, part of, Archaon's plan. And the other end of the portal immediately dumps them above the city of Phoenixguard, riding a tide of magic down. Essentially, imagine just horses running downward at a city on trails of fire. Honestly, this seems like a unique thing. I'm not sure if we'll see it again, but yeah. If you're on the ground in Phoenicium, a storm rolls in, and then an army of chaos pours out from overhead. The Lumineth Realm Lords who were there in the city are of the Windmaster sect, and so they fly up to meet the Chaos Army in the sky. And so begins one of the most anime-level fights ever, right? Flying knights charging at each other, Windmasters throwing energy around, there's lightning, magic everywhere, demons. As they're dying on both sides, bodies are just kind of flying to the ground, splatting around. Abraxia descends on the city, and they kind of have to approach it, even though they're coming from the sky, they have to approach it carefully. If you run directly at the temple, you get zapped by magic and die. Like there was a barrier around it or something like that. And so her plan is, instead of going straight for the temple, we're going to work our way there by going through the city streets, jungle warfare style, and just cause hell. When the Phoenix Guards present themselves, we kill them. The more Phoenix Guard you kill, it chips away at that protection. Their magic is more communal, like they kind of pull it together to make this defense network. So you essentially bleed it dry is her plan. Just go into the alleyways, the streets, pick fights, and when you meet resistance, crush it. They do just that, and eventually their way is opened directly to the Temple of the Phoenix. Now at this point in our story, Abraxia has just about lost her mind. Because of her curse, all the things going around in her head, she can't really tell friend from foe, but she just keeps throwing herself forward. Like, she has enough insight in herself to be like, I need to get to the fire. I know I have to get here. What for? Maybe hazy. And her vision goes between seeing people as regal knights to horrific bone constructs, all kinds of weird stuff. She's having a time. And she presses ahead of her army to get there faster. Eventually, she barges into the Chamber of Flame, and the only thing in there is a single elf, who had essentially mantled the power and took it into himself. I should note here, there is a sidebar, a kind of a side plot in a sidebar to the narrative going on here about the Lumineth Rumlord's twins, Alania and Elithor. They were there when the Lumineth contingent arrived, and they make it out of the city with an ember of the flames. And they have a great discussion about like, oh, the Phoenix will rise again from these ashes, specifically the ashes they're holding. So like, it's not the end of the road for Phoenix Guard in general. It's just, I wanted to throw that out there, that there is a plot that keeps them in play. The rest of the flames of the Phoenix were channeled into this dude, who Abraxa is now staring at. And what commences here is a true Dark Souls fight, right? The Phoenix Lord is consumed in blue flame. He takes on the form of a giant blue phoenix, wreathed in fire, lashes out in waves of like just energy that are coming and just knocking Abraxia always till Sunday. And it's interesting because the book describes him and this ascension as beautiful and heavenly, but Abraxia is so out of it, she sees him as like a flesh golem rather than a dignified arcane bird. Still, after an awesome fight scene, she lands her spear into the belly of the beast, and the Lord tumbles to the ground below. Seeing that the fire is now inside the man, Abraxia begins to eat him while he is still alive, and the scene ends with the last true defenders at the heart of Phoenicium falling as their lord is screaming in horror and agony. Fade to black. Let's talk about why is this cool. I do this at the end of all my videos. Phoenicium sounds like a great place to dungeon dive, and I don't know why they never used it more as a location for things. The idea that the city is locked in amber, literally, makes it highly interesting to me. It just seems like it's made for dungeon diving games, and I was just like, I don't want you to destroy it. I kind of wanted you guys to use it for something, but all right, I'll take it too, I guess. Abraxia is a really cool character. I appreciated her introduction. One thing I will say, though, is I was just very disappointed that in the final book of the Dawnbringer campaign series, we didn't really have anything to do with the cities that were founded. We finally got here, and what could have been an epic stand ended up just kind of being a distraction, almost like Abraxia was gonna deliver the final punch to Verdigris and then just punched a random bystander instead. I'm gonna say it here now, going to do a post-mortem video where I kind of give my thoughts on the series as well as rewrites that I would do that maintain the product line of what was released. But to my point being here, like I'm glad they did something with the city. I just wish they did more before they destroyed it. The Phoenix Lord fight scene was awesome. It was true anime boss level, and it was very exciting to see like Abraxia losing her mind while trying to achieve a mission. It was cool. Again, all thumbs up for her. It was more just like, but why in this book, right? Why not give her own book or more of like a introductory campaign series with the new edition rather than having her close out the old one? I just didn't get it. Regardless, we're going to keep our coverage of the Dawnbringers Part 6 book going in my next video, tackling the start of the Akshi Crusade. I hope that you will join me for that. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I will catch you next time. Happy wargaming, friends! Welcome, Wargamers, to the Ashen Wastes of the Mortal Realms. Today we're talking about the Crusade of Fire, that half of the twin-tailed crusade that set out from Akshi to found a new city. Or rather, I should say, we're talking really about the events that are happening in Akshi surrounding that crusade. How about that? If you remember last time we focused on Akshi, there was a plot averted by Callison Toll to corrupt all of the city with flesh-eater courts over in Hammerhall. And in this book, we kind of start off talking about Akshi with sort of a bird's eye view, some ideas that are being discussed by the Grand Conclave in Hammerhall Akshi. So we get insight into what their situation is, right? The briefing from kind of their perspective, which I appreciated. And the situation is this. There's another massive Khorne army bearing down on Hammerhall Aksha. Embergard, the new city that was just founded by Pontifex Zenestra, is reporting back good messages, but the Conclave wants to send a fortified Stormcast Eternal presence there to make sure it's a line in the sand. We got this. Right, someone who would show that they mean business. And so The Conclave of Hammerhall wants to send hero Vandus Hammerhand, who protests. He doesn't want to sit in a city and just wait for chaos to come to them. His pitch to the Conclave is this: let Vandus ride out of the city. We're going to intercept this warband, which we believe is led by Corgus Cull, when he's not expecting it. We'll take him out, I'll settle my grudges, and we will deflate the Khorne campaign. And if nothing else, right, I mean, this is kind of his money-back guarantee. If nothing else, us leaving and going out will set the battle line far away from where the walls are, so they can still be rebuilt, refitted from the last Khorne army, the one that Vedra had to come back and fight off. So that's Vandus's pitch instead. Don't make me go play guard duty, let me go hunt Cull. And the Conclave goes, yeah, okay, we could do this, yeah, totally. But the Grand Marshal herself, Vedra, thinks this is the dumbest thing ever. And I love this, right? She's looking at Vandus going like, this is obviously just about him and his bromance with Corgus Cull. Stop trying to ship these two and station this dingus at the fort in Emberguard. But the Conclave relents, and so Vedra decides essentially to take her knights and move with the Stormcast, basically because she wants to keep an eye on Vandus. And so that's where things stand in Akshi. Cull is apparently descending upon the city. Emberguard is right over there. Thumbs up right now, but waiting for reinforcements. And tensions are rising. And we're going to dig into the plot going forward, but one thing before I do that. Now, our story picks back up in this section in a very interesting way, okay? Like, we just had this whole point of view of the Grand Conclave and Hammerhall kind of giving us the situation, and then our story immediately pivots to a completely new direction, and I promise you, it will come circle back and be relevant, but it was a bit jarring, if I'm totally honest with you, because the point of view refocuses on a meeting between various Dark Oath tribe leaders at one of their places of ceremony, known as the Grove of Knives. And these tribes, like all Dark Oath, are in service to Archaon and Chaos Undivided. They may worship ancestral gods, they may not call the four Chaos gods by their true names, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, whatever, but like they worship some elemental aspects of chaos. We'll talk about it more in a future video, but they have fleshed out the Dark Oath side of that army way more than it ever was before, and it's really compelling stuff. And the leaders and the shaman of all these tribes start to begin receiving visions of what the Ever-Chosen wants, just like we talked about they did over in Gioran, right? When Abraxia was kind of mustering a whole bunch of Dark Oath tribes. This is something kind of similar, but over here, these tribes have been plagued by demonic forms trying to pierce the veil and deliver messages. In return for faithful service, these entities give boons, strength, long life, but also spells and magics that help them survive the wastes or live more safely or hunt more productively. And this book gives us a really awesome snapshot into the Dark Oath ecosystem, right? How they live together. All these tribes that have boundaries and territories meeting to parlay and plan. But on this meeting, it becomes clear that they've all gotten spun up into some kind of plot, right? Normally they would come to this place, the regular meeting of tribes, and they'd boast about all the things that they've done, right? This big beast that I slayed, a vision that I had, or, a demon told me to hunt Sylvaneth, and I did, right? Everyone boasts about this, but this time it's weird because everyone kind of boasts the exact same story, and they all kind of realize it at once. A rat-like demon, kind of clad in shadow, can't make out a real form here, claiming to speak on behalf of the Ever-Chosen, has ordered the tribes to spread out and corrupt places of arcane power. Across the entire mountain range of the Adamantine Chain, there are places of geomantic power, realm gates, all these kinds of things, and these tribe leaders are all boasting about the number that they have corrupted. Now at this point, one person is doing the math much faster than the others. Our story pauses and we meet a new character, Gunnar Brand of the Brands. Now, he is actually part of an animated series that's on Warhammer Plus, but I have not watched that yet. That being said, I cannot wait to after listening or reading all of this. He's a highly compelling Dark Oath character who he has very sensible motivations, which is so rare in the Chaos faction. But Gunnar is one of these tribe leaders, and he's looking around at all these people boasting and making their claims, and he realizes one of the tribe's leaders is missing. He's like, his land is like right there. We live in his backyard. Why isn't he here? He should have been here first. So him and another delegate go out of this friend's house to see what's up. They find an esteemed member of their tribal community slain, all of his lands and his servants' quarter, all this stuff. It's all just burned down, set ablaze with clearly warp fire. And slowly they begin to kind of piece their experiences with these demons together. It looks like, from the outset, all the clues put together, a similar deal was offered to this tribal leader that was offered to the other ones. However, when this leader saw how corrupting the warp stone was to his own territory, he said no. He's like, no, I'm not going to do this for you. You're destroying my lands. And the Skaven did not take no for an answer. So they get back to the meeting of tribal chiefs, explain the situation, and it becomes clear that they are being played. The Skaven are doing something, and they've been employing these tribes to do whatever it is. And so, the Dark Oath tribes of the Adamantine Chain unite and move to a place called Chakrick's Folly, the nearest known Skaven hold. They're gonna knock on the door, we want some answers. Now let's talk for a second about this city, Chakrick's Folly. There's not a ton of lore to go on here. In fact, most of it I found from the Soulbound core rulebook, but it is interesting and worth noting because it will become important for future events, I'm sure. This is a mine and warren city that is renowned amongst Skavendom for being structurally stable, which is not a terribly high bar, but it does set it apart. Especially because this is one of the largest deposits of warpstone known within the realms. It was established by Clan Scryer engineer Chakrick, and seems to be exceptionally well entrenched. Fyreslayers have been trying for decades to peel these guys out of these lands. Apparently it used to be an ancestral home of the Fyreslayers. It's just not working. And so, the Dark Oath arrive, and the plan is such. A portion of the Dark Oath army will form an infiltrating party. The rest will go to the front door and attack as sort of a distraction. The infiltrators will break in and sabotage any and all warpstone manufacturing, processing, anything they can. Just ruin whatever the Skaven are doing. I don't even care what it is. Something's happening, I don't know what, but let's just shut it down to be sure. And this part of the story goes off fairly well. There's some awesome fight scenes between Dark Oath and Skaven. Honestly, it seems like whoever wrote out the plot for the commercial we saw for 4th edition with the Skaven just going hog wild kind of wrote some of the scenes here. There's rifles, Jezzails, hell pit abominations going absolutely mad. And they're making their way deeper into Chakrick's Folly, and a few things begin to stick out to these parties of Dark Oath. The first thing is that these gears, cogs, power lines, engines, all the junk that they're seeing seems to all be connected and feeding into one central chamber. The second thing they notice is the lack of dead Skaven. See, this stands out to the Dark Oath because Skaven have civil wars and infighting so often that it's noticeable when they are unified, right? When they're not killing each other, it's quite noticeable by the number of dead bodies on the ground. So they're looking around and be like, they're not fighting amongst themselves, that's not good. And lastly, ever since they stepped foot on the property of Chakrick's Folly, a bell started tolling. Now, they assumed that this was a bell to rouse, the Skaven. However, it's taken on a very uncanny toll. First of all, the sounds are deafening, and every single time it echoes, it gets more and more intense. Now, the Brands and his forces make their way into the main chamber of this stronghold, which is where that big Hell Pit Abomination fight happens. It's so cool. And there's an incredibly gross and cool scene where a bunch of Skaven are drawn together like in a singular spot, and they almost get smushed together by invisible hands. Like they mutate, merge, contort, their bones rip apart and merge back together with somebody else's. And from a Skaven flesh golem comes Screech Vermin King, personal emissary to the Great Horned Rat. He delivers a fantastic battle, like a boss speech about how he's going to destroy everything. And he appears right as the 13th toll of the bells ring out. And at that sound, all the machines, the technology, the equipment throughout Chakrick's Folly begin to go haywire, overcharging and releasing wild amounts of energy. There's like lightning everywhere. There's a few words exchanged between Brand and Vermin King, but essentially he's like, go ahead and run. Be my little emissary. Go tell everybody what happened. Right? Tell all your other tribes people, we are in charge now. So he starts running. And as the bells continue to toll, right, as they're building to this crescendo of the 13th one, the adamantine chain in Akshi goes supernova. And the great horn rat has breathed a new dawn into the mortal realms. The Skaven Doom, orchestrated by liars and oathbreakers, used the Dark Oath tribes to their end. No matter how they did it or who did it, it is here. And tomorrow we are going to talk about the Skaven Doom. I'm making you wait for desserts because yes, we have the perspective of the events that pull the trigger in the story of Gunnar Brand. Right? He knows what happened, he was there. But tomorrow we're going to talk about the perspective of everybody else. But I'd like to end the story here and talk about why is this cool. This honestly is the best Marauder story ever. We see oaths being made and fulfilled in real time, which is a mechanic that they've kind of always tried to do with the Slaves to Darkness stuff, as far as like demonstrating your abilities before Chaos Gods kind of a thing. They sacrifice one of their own in the Brand family for directions, so they are very savage, but they have a kindness to them. And they kind of go into a Callous and Toll style mystery, but without the raw intelligence, right? They have a cunning, but not the intelligence kind of factor. It made sense, it gave us insight, it was a very cool play-by-play of what it's like to invade a Skaven fortification of some kind. I loved it as a storytelling mechanic in the campaign books, because you know what it reminded me of? Back in the Soul Wars, when we got this like lore snippet of Skaven playing around inside the Great Black Pyramid, they were like trying to like chisel out Realmstone and just to mess with it. It was kind of like that. We got a perspective, boots on the ground, what was happening there at the epicenter, and then of course the rest of the stories are about what happened to the rest of the setting. But it was a really great way to introduce Gunnar Brand narratively, at least to the written form, and having them be at the center of events so we see what happened at the Skaven Doom. The guns, the creepy tech, the behemoths, the cramped corridors. I absolutely love it. And I would pay a fortune for the next big archenemy to begin their plot by infiltrating a Dark Oath camp, right? The Skaven were infiltrating Nagash, now we're infiltrating the Skaven. Who's gonna tackle the Dark Oath? That'll be our next villain. Anyway, friends, leave your comments down below. I'd love to know your thoughts on the story. And I am so excited for 4th edition AOS, I cannot even tell you. So stay tuned and click subscribe for all the content for that. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and happy wargaming. Welcome, wargamers, to the blood feud-soaked plains of the mortal realms. Today we are talking about Vandus Hammerhand and Korgus Cole in Dawnbringer Part 6, Hounds of Chaos, and Part 4 of its coverage here on the channel. Now, last time in our story regarding the events happening in Akshi, we were a little distracted, right? We followed the exploits of some Dark Oath tribes and how they arrived at the epicenter of the Skaven Doom. But what I want to do in this video is redirect to another part of Akshi that we had talked about before, the fate of Vandus Hammerhand. And we're going to follow that story to the same point narratively and then continue after with the Skaven Doom. I think that's a great way to bring all the events to a head, and we have everybody kind of where they are when the chapter turns to the next series in Age of Sigmar. So, if we remember, Vandus was originally supposed to go fortify Emberguard, but he protested. He's like, no, you don't want me to do that. You guys want me to go intercept Korgus Cole. Against Vedra's better judgment, the council agrees, and they say, okay, we won't send you to Emberguard. I tell you what, we'll send another Hammer of Sigmar hero. We're going to send Gavriel Sureheart and his regiments to Emberguard. Vandus, you take Vedra and go intercept Kull. And while Vandus and Vedra do meet up with a Khorne army, it is being led by a Slaughter Priest. They defeat the army coming at them, and as the Slaughter Priest is being interrogated right before he dies, Vandus has a vision. If you know this, Vandus Hammerhand has been plagued by visions every time he gets reforged more and more. There's some latent psychic power in him, but anyway, this vision is of a golden warrior holding a broken sword, standing before a massive demonic figure with 2 axes and a city that's on fire, which sounds like a death metal album cover if I've ever heard of one. So let's talk about what this all means and meet back up with our story from yesterday. Now, this chapter of our story opens up on my boy Corgus Cole himself. And he's standing on a cliff, looking down at a battle happening before him and just kind of lost in thought. And I love the insight into his mind that we get as he's kind of ruminating. Corgus Cole was there in the beginning. He was about to claim his reward and become a demon prince in the first AOS story, and Vandus interrupted and ruined that ritual. Since then, Vandus has been a source of shame for Corgus Cole, a thorn in his side constantly, the challenge he could not overcome. Even when he followed the orders of Archaon and went to the Orb Infernia during the Realmgate Wars, he was thwarted again. And he, as a character, has been rather silent for a few years. And this is because Khorne has been silent to Kull. He's out here killing, murdering, but no offerings or supplications seem to matter. He's not hearing from his deity. Until one day out of the blue, the Red God speaks. He wants the head of a Lord Celestant. Boom. First time you hear the voice of God in a lot of years and you're given one mission, that becomes your whole world. Corgus Cole was leading that huge Khorne army that we talked about before, the one that Vandus was like, I need to go intercept Kull. But upon receiving this divine message, he kind of decided to have a new fondness for murder. It reinvigorated him, right? Reminded him why he loves doing what he does. And so Kull took his personal guard and they went off on their own adventure. Basically, he delegated starting the siege to the Slaughter Priest, who was headed towards Hammerhall. Corgus Cole is going to take a side force. We're going to go check out this new place called Emberguard, and we'll circle back. We'll meet back up with you, and then when the siege is ready, then we'll all attack together. Which makes sense. It's probably takes a long time to set up the siege and get things going. And along his travels, sure enough, Corgus Cole and his warband meet up with Gavriel Sureheart and his forces headed towards Emberguard. This is the fight that we started our scene with him kind of ruminating over. Cole sends in his Bloodbound for the attack, and in the background, while this is kind of happening, Vandus is just getting back from his assault. He realizes he was baited out in the wrong direction, and that Gavriel and his men are most likely in the path of destruction. So he uses the Hammerhall Sky Bridge, which think of it as like an arcane catapult, just kind of throws you around the immediate area, and it launches Vandus and his men towards Gavriel, like emergency reinforcements. They had no time to rest, resupply. It's a ragged reinforcement army sent to help overwhelmed friends. Vandus arrives and immediately starts bellowing challenges to Corgus Cole. Right? He sees him up on that cliff where we first met Corgus thinking real hard, and Vandus is like, I'm gonna rip you limb from limb. You have no honor. You're not good enough for the Blood God because you never could beat me. He's like throwing everything at him. And this scene is awesome, and I really did appreciate it because we get a glimpse of what the Ruination Chamber might be like. Because the closer he is to Corgus Cole, Vandus gets more and more just undone. Right? He just starts losing his mind. He's not doing like the full tactical advance and trying to be, the best tactician or leader or military mind. He's just going savage. He arrives just in time to see Corgus Cole rush Gavriel, smash his sword in half, and take his head with the reality-splitting axe. In fact, the body is sucked into an eternity beyond, and Gavriel's head falls to the ground. And this whole time, Corgus Cole is yelling taunts back at Vandus. And he's like, your kids were more fun to kill than you were, buddy. Which is just like, that's just not the thing to say to Vandus. I don't know, man. And so a couple things all converge here in this scene. Gavriel Sureheart permadies. No more Tommy Wiseau models. Vandus Hammerhand mentally snaps. He hits his knees. And the reason is because now, because of his short-sightedness of wanting to intercept Kull and not do what he was asked to do, he got like 8 times as many people killed. Right? He threw this whole contingent out to the wind. He divided their forces up. It was just an absolute mess. And the third and final thing that happens is my boy Corgus Cole finally ascends to demonhood. His form lifts off the ground, his muscles grow, he sprouts wings from his back, he becomes an absolute megalithic form, a monster of Vandus' visions wreathed in fire and rage. And in this moment, where Vandus is on his knees looking at this new unstoppable enemy, when Vandus can't fathom how the world could get any worse than this, they get exceedingly worse than that. Korghos Khul's ascension coincides with another event. In the background of this entire affair, the adamantine chain mountain range, which has been overlooking all of these things, detonates. At the heart of this, the machinations of the Skaven have reached critical mass as their bells reach the 13th toll and our stories converge in the Vermin Doom. What were the Skaven doing? What is this all about? We get our answers in a bit of dialogue that I left out in our last video with Screech Vermin King, who is by far one of the best characters in terms of dialogue. He speaks with a plurality because he's like 13 Skaven souls merged into one. It's really cool. And he basically lays out the whole plan for Gunnar Brand. This plot was approved by the Everchosen. That part was not a lie. The lie was that the Dark Oath tribes were to be involved. They were used, no questions about it. But the plan of the Skaven was to create a singular, epic gnawhole of such scale and magnitude that it threatened to rip Akshi apart. This entire campaign series, the Skaven have been watching. I should say this entire time in AOS, because it's multiple campaign series that this eclipses. They've seen the Silver Towers fall and detonate a bunch of realm gates, or Be'lakor use realm gates to create the rift in the sky that necessitated the need for the new Stormcast armor. How thin the veils of reality can be when those two things happen together. You see, the Skaven tricked the Dark Oath into poisoning their own lands with warpstone at geomagnetic sites, and rigging realm gates to blow all over the place. And when the 13th bell struck, it all went off at once, and pointed specifically at one place in the realm of chaos. Like, all of these destruction things were calculated to bring a specific point into the mortal realms, that is, Skaven Blight City. With this explosion, the mountain range was leveled. As mind-blowing towers, splinters in reality were raised up, and the Skaven, long an underground presence, take their stage as the main player of the mortal realms. And this is where the book ends. Now let's stop here and talk about why is this cool. Well, I mean, Embergard still stands as far as we know. That city wasn't destroyed. In fact, the whole promotional thing they did about one city will stand, one will fall, it seemed like they were talking about Phoenicium. I was like, okay, so Embergard's still there. Vandus is alive. Maybe. We don't know if he gets away from Korghos Khul. It felt like this particular one had a lot of great threads, but very little resolution to it. But let's tackle it in two parts here. First off, we're going to start with the fight with Korghos Khul. I adore the idea of ending this iteration of the AOS rules with the original duel between two awesome dudes. And this was an interesting book because it did a great job of clarifying what the last century has done to them specifically. Korghos Khul was defeated, but he stayed diligent. And when the opportunity came, he was not distracted by personal vendettas. He went for Gavriel Sureheart because he was told to get a Lord Celestin's head, not Vandus's. In game terms, friends, Korghos Khul knows how to play for the objective points. Conversely, Vandus lost his mind, and is now making decisions at the highest level while going insane. He's even seeing visions of, quote-unquote, the Lightning Man, which I guess is like the Slender Man for Stormcast Eternals as they go crazy, I don't know. And given a similar momentous task of, defeating your ultimate enemy, Vandus let his petty vendetta distract him, and it got a lot of people killed. He didn't reinforce the cities, he wanted Khul. And I am so excited for Korghos Khul to be released as a Demon Prince model. I hope they do. I don't know. I hope they take the time, whenever they do the Battle Tomes for Khorne in the new edition, give us a Korghos Khul Demon Prince, please. He sounds like Angeron from 40k. Now, as for the fate of the realms themselves, well, this is certainly a marker of Chaos Ascendant. Skaven are clearly the main threat in this edition. And we know Archaon approved of the plan. So what's his play in all of this? I don't quite know, but I am excited to learn more as the edition unfolds. I'm pretty sure, like all of these, main boxes, there's going to be a novel that comes out in support of it. I'm dying to read that because what I feel like we need is more eyes on the ground. Not just of the explosion in Akshi like we got in the preview video, but if chaos is rising everywhere, tell me about the perspective of someone in another realm. Right, that was the great thing about the other big cataclysms, is we see how everyone is affected. This book specifically did not tell us how everyone was affected. There was a community article that came out later that said like Skaven are going everywhere now, which is a big resurgence. But this book specifically made it seem very localized to Akshi. And while the teaser that we have going into this next edition is that a mountain range was destroyed and Skavenblight City itself rose to the mortal realms, the stories that creates remain to be seen. And how Archaon uses this to his advantage is something I am highly interested to learn. Now that, friends, is the conclusion of the Dawnbringer Crusade. I want to end this video by saying I am going to do another video that's sort of like a post-mortem, because as I'm reading this, I'm realizing there is a very strong and compelling story here that I feel like the team didn't quite land. This was a very rough ending. For spending 5 books talking about these Crusades, the final book in the series has nothing to do with either of the Crusades, really. So what I'd like to do is take a whack at redoing some of the story with the same product releases and everything, and presenting it to you guys in a different way. I hope you're interested in hearing about that, but this is the complete story as it is officially written, and we are going to be circling back to these events, I'm sure, in great magnitude as we try to wrestle with what the Skaven have done to the setting, how it affects everybody in every realm, and what the future of Age of Sigmar looks like. I would love to hear your thoughts on the campaign series. What did you like? What didn't you like? What are your favorite models and releases? Without question, mine is the Super Pig for the Iron Jaws. I feel like that model is the undisputed winner of the campaign book, but I understand and am willing to listen to other arguments. Actually, I just realized that Usharan came out in this release, and I just made my own question very difficult. Anyway, tell me your thoughts in the comments down below, and I would love to catch you there. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and happy wargaming, friends. Welcome, Wargamers, to the final sealed fates of the Mortal Realms, because today we're talking about the definitive, when it's all said and done, all the books combined kind of a thing, conclusion for the Dawnbringer series. You see, for dramatic effect, I've left a few of the ending points out, and these kind of present themselves in the physical book as like a single page that has some beautiful artwork and maybe 2 to 3 paragraphs, but they give us kind of like our final stills of what is going on. And so today we're going to walk through a series of these resolutions from the Dawnbringer books, pontificate on where we think the game is headed based on them, and answer one question once and for all: just what the heck happened here at the end? Like I said, the book's layout is interesting. Essentially, you have the main story that we covered all the videos till now, and then there's this weird break where there's the lore for like the Dark Oath units that we got and a few other things, but then it jumps immediately into these like little ending slides, and they kind of make me feel like Fallout, the video games, like where you have the slideshow at the end kind of telling you what happened. So today we are going to learn about the fates of City Commander Thorian, Pontifex Zenestra, the cities Phoenicium, Verdigris, Embergard, and lastly about Vandis and Ionis. When I cover campaign books, I generally do so in the same format that they're presented, meaning I write my notes as I am reading it so that if there's a twist at the end, I'm not going to spoil it before it's time, right? I read ahead a little bit to get a sense of where we're headed, but I try to preserve twists and storytelling elements, stuff like that. I do feel like the writers of these books deserve that much, so I'm not just reading it like a Wikipedia page. And one of the things, for example, here is I mentioned that Thorian passed out after Abraxia's attack, and we speculated at the fate of Vandis and Embergard and stuff like that. But what we're going to do in this video is break down the final scenes of this campaign that answers some of those questions, and so you're going to need to buckle up because it's grim and it's awesome. The first one I want to cover is the fate of the city Verdigris and its city commander Thorian. Consistently, Thorian was my favorite character among the big players within the Crusade series. It goes Thorian, Vedra, and then, I don't know, a few other minor characters below there, but those are really the two that stand out to me. I'll give Trug number 3 just cuz. We've seen her set out from Hammerhall Gyra, and as these stories have progressed, it's become clear that not only is she a formidable military commander, but also she has some kind of latent druidic power within her. Her family is descended of people from Ghyran, and so as she ventures deeper and gets more involved in the magics of the realm, she's been changing. In epic fights throughout the series, she will like summon vines, or she'll heal in the sunlight. Later in the battles and towards the last book, her skin has taken on a hard, like bark-like quality, so it becomes painful for her to move, but she's becoming more tree than she is person, slowly. And all of that leads up to this moment in Book 6 when Abraxia is charging. Her, meaning Thorian's body, is racked with pain, it's very difficult to move, and as she sees the charge coming in, that's when Balthanos appears. And in fact, what stands out to her most are the horn blasts. He has this like Kurnothi horn that is magical in some ways. Basically, it's like a big, I don't know, think of it as like a magic horn that projects farther than any other sound, but it's used to summon allies to his hunt. And there's something about the horn that is wrecking Thorian. Like every time it sounds, she like is racked with pain and falls, and that's ultimately why she collapsed. Well, she passes out once the enemy is routed, and when she wakes up, she's alone in her quarters. This is now diving into that little end scene here. Wakes up alone in her quarters, and she keeps hearing the deafening horn blasts, but nobody else seems to. Like there's something like got stuck in her craw about it. And she's looking around, and honestly, nobody's even really noticing that she's okay. Like they set her in her room, and then everybody went to go back to work and repair because they were attacked. You know, stuff did happen. And while no one is seeing her, she discreetly slips out of the city into the woods. The idea here is that when Balthanos came back, the horn blast triggered something inside of her, whatever power latent she had, and now he was just constantly calling to her, and she decided she needed to answer that call. Her pain is gone, and she has achieved her final form. It's a very short line here at the end, but basically it alludes to the fact that she can see a shadow of like her antlers in the moonlight. End scene. Now, my immediate thought when I read that was, oh my gosh, is this their way of introducing the full faction version of Skaith's Wild Hunt? I have it on the screen here. If you don't know, this is an Underworlds warband that they never really did anything else with. But it features changed and altered humanoids that clearly look like they are meant to serve the god of the hunt. Now, keep in mind, in the story, Thorian's body took on a more tree-like aspect, but I think it wouldn't be hard to make those two ideas fit into the same model range. Or, conversely, maybe GW released Skaith's Wild Hunt and then realized, oh wow, people actually really liked the idea of wood elves, I guess. And then now what we're seeing with Thorian is the introduction of the full line that isn't necessarily the same as Skaith's Wild Hunt, but uses the artistic vision and aspects and then made it something bigger. This is all wild speculation, by the way. But that said, I'm excited to see an aspect of her story continuing through, because I wondered, right, they said initially like one crusade will stand, one will fall, and I'm like, okay, well, one of them has a named model, so how are we going to add any tension or whatever to this story, right? Like, Zenestra is obviously going to be the one, right? Because she can't die. And then what they did was just kind of went around that by saying, like, you know, she's not important in the context of Cities of Sigmar, but she could be exceptionally important in the context of the next chapter of the story. And so I thought that was a fantastic ending. As much as I kind of harped on like the slow progress of the books, her particular story and the changes she made over the course of the books is a highlight to me. It should be the norm, but it is the highlight. So I'm so excited at the idea of her being used narratively to introduce us to something else. Don't let that character go to waste, so to speak. Now, as for her city, right, so that's the story of Thorian herself. As for the city, Verdigris, the story ends with the city being founded. It's in disrepair from the various attacks, but it is stable enough for now. And it begins consistently receiving reinforcements, so the idea is, as our camera kind of pans off, things are looking good. One thing I feel like they never resolved, and I'm putting this here at my final conclusions video, I don't remember them ever saying exactly where the realm gate it's built around pointed to. There was a Slaanesh warband, It's a giant flower, but like they never talked about the other side of it, if they're going to fortify it, contain it. It was just kind of this, it exists, but there's not a whole lot there. Which is a far cry from some of the other cities who like, the Realm Gate is the point, you know? But yeah, they were saved narrowly by Balthanos, who collected his warriors to his hunt, meaning Thorian, and Verdigris is now a new city of Sigmar. Now we're going to pivot to the next little still here, our conclusion, and this is regarding the other crusade, Emberguard. And this one is a tough one, okay? Let me unpack this. They only give them like 2 to 3 paragraphs, as I said, and there's a lot to see here. The scene is essentially that Vedra and her army, after all the events we talked about, everything with Vandus, all that kind of stuff, she arrives at Emberguard with her personal reinforcements. Remember, Vandus launched himself through the Skybridge, Vedra let her guys rest, recoup, and then moved out in good haste. So, bypassing anything Vandus was going to do, she goes straight to Emberguard, and from their perspective, they sent out Vandus, and it was all quiet. So, is this place here or not, right? Did Vandus get swept up in fighting back the forces of Khorne that never materialized? Is the city okay? Is he here, like, defending the city and they can't get a message out? So they have no idea. Vedra arrives with her troops, finds the city in utter ruin. It's rubble. Like, there's no stone unturned kind of a destruction. But from the ashes, refugees, former citizens of Emberguard, anyone who was in the area start coming into view, and they somehow survived whatever happened here. And they give an account that right before the Vermin Doom explosion that rocked the mountain range that they sit at the base of, Pontifex Zenestra left them. She just up and out. They presumed it's because they as people were faithless somehow, that they forsook the blessings of the Great Wheel. But the idea is she just like Audi 5000. And then immediately when she did, things went to hell, scene end. And I will be honest, I did not care for this resolution. It's more than I said in the last video, but it wasn't very satisfying. The marketing said one city would stand, the other would fall. And so my question to you is Phoenicium the one that fell? Because is Emberguard fallen? I mean, it has a population, it's still rich in resources, it would make a great outpost now against the Skaven, a new threat. It has a history that plays directly into a named character, the Pontifex, and also Vedra herself. Remember, this was her crusade that she initially left with, got pulled back, and then met back up with here in the last scene. So, like, it's a place that matters. I look at this, and I say, okay, well, Emberguard still stands. It's set all the way back to 0, but all the reasons that they settled here are still valid. So it seemed like oddly unclear of the actual fate of the city, because it could just be that Vedra's like, oh wow, like there's so many people, let's bring you back to Hammerhall, and that would be equally as sensible. So they just didn't kind of give us a final line. And then there's the fate of the Pontifex. Now, I would have at least liked to hear something like, she fled back to the Order of Azir, trying to get ahead of the rumors of her failure or something. Or maybe she went to go seize power somewhere else, took a detachment, I don't know, something, but just to have her fade away into the background was a weird choice. The previous 5 books were about her taking control and constantly increasing the zeal to unsustainable levels, and so her ending is to go, you all don't have any faith, and just peace off out camera, relinquish all the control she worked for, and the faith that was built and used as a weapon. Okay. Now let's chat Phoenicium. I already covered one of the resolution bits because it seemed meaningful at the time regarding the final ashes of the Ur-Phoenix being carried away by the Lumineth Realm Lord twins. So the idea of the Phoenix Temple and stuff is not invalidated at all. It's not completely destroyed. It's absolutely saved. And it's going to be carried back to Hysh. But for the city itself, this place got a raw deal. Within the context of the narrative, Abraxia took the city utterly and completely, right? She refortified it and named it the Black Spire, which is a super metal name. And her little cutscene that gives us the fate of Phoenicium is essentially having a chat with Archaon through etheric VoIP, and he congratulates her on staying alive, getting the cure. He bequeaths this new citadel to Abraxia, and basically says, you are going to use this as your home base, and you're going to paint Ghyran red. At some point, Abraxia begins to question some of Archaon's plans, and I think validly so. She just basically said, hey, it would have been really cool to get a heads up about the mountain chain blowing up and a piece of hell ripping out of it. He basically says, don't question me. I have plans, and the Great Horned Rat is a part of it. And then the scene ends. And so here's our conclusions from this. 1, Phoenicium is no more, or at least as we knew it. If you modeled your army off of it, you could easily say that they were refugee forces that escaped, something like that. That all said, GW, please stop destroying the very few color schemes that we have. There are other ways to add consequences besides cities getting flipped or destroyed. This also means the Ever-Chosen, whether he intended things to go the way they did or not, is using the Skaven to further his personal plans, which I'm so excited and desperately hoping that they address what his plans really are in this current edition. Now, our last little fate, our slide here to discuss, is the fate of Vandus Hammerhand. Now, just like I said in my previous story when I covered the actual last battle between him, we don't know exactly how he got away from Kull. The scene opens up with Ionis Cryptborn cruising to the site of where Vandus and Kull's fight was on his sweet new model, and when the mountain range erupted, remember it happened pretty much the same time Korghos Kull ascended, the entire battlefield was sealed in magma, rock, and debris. We're not told a lot about that instant, but my assumption here is that Korghos Kull saw the rock slide everywhere and was like, he's probably dead, and then left. But in that mess, that rock and overflow and avalanche, Vandus was alive, and Ionis digs him up. The sad part here is that, just to confirm what happened during the battle, Vandus Hammerhand is officially off of his rocker. He's screaming constantly about seeing crows encircle him to devour him. He has those hallucinations about the lightning man coming for his soul. He has no higher function. It's just pure madness mixed with a PTSD response and the loss of his humanity. It's just a lot of things going on. And so the story here is Ionis puts him into essentially a mortuary casket of some kind and seals him away, and is sad to do so. And had we not had that kind of delay in shipping, world shipping or whatever, I'm sure we would have gotten this before we knew about the Ruination Chamber. This is, I'm sure, meant to be our spoiler or teaser for that. But sure enough, it seems like Vandus has now been consigned to the Ruination Chamber. He's been reforged too many times, and I'm just hoping he gets an awesome send-off here in the new edition. Now let's end this video like I end all of them by talking about why is this cool? We're going to tackle these one by one here. When it comes to Verdigris and Thorian, I love Thorian and her story. I honestly have very, very few notes here. I would love to see that this character was used to segue into a new faction. It certainly explains why she's so much cooler than Pontifex while still not having a model. As for the city itself, I'm glad it stands because they described it as being very beautiful, and I'm excited to see what it looks like as it fortifies. I really hope there's some kind of soulbound coverage for it. That's the Age of Sigmar role-playing game by Cubicle 7. But they do a whole bunch of cool stuff. They use life magics. Half of the city is grown rather than built. It just seems highly interesting. And the whole campaign in Ghyran, considering they had the Flesh Eater Courts arc and the Iron Jaws and the Fort Guard, it just consistently was the more interesting of the stories in my opinion. But now let's chat about Pontifex Zenestra and Emberguard. I have very different feelings about this one, as I alluded to. The book never really clearly states if it's destroyed. They have a populace that has just been reinforced by Vedra, like I said, who was supposed to be in charge of the city plant all along. And all in all, the things that made this a good place to settle still hold up, and so, I don't know, I think even if they ended the clip with a sentence like, "This wasn't the same crusade that Vedra set out with, though their gaunt faces pleaded of familiarity, this would, however, be the city that she would lead." Something like that that's oh, okay, she planted her flag, or it would be the people she saved and pull them back to Hammerhall, something with a little more finality to it. As for the Pontifex, I have nothing. The off-screen fadeaway just made me put my book down and sigh a little bit. What an awesome model. What a cool story of usurping power through religious zeal. How the fates and ideologies of Vedra and Zenestra could have met back up at this scene when all the consequences of Pontifex's ideas have been played out for everybody. But it just didn't happen. I liked Abraxia. The sacking of Phoenicium was a cool scene. Really, I'm just more excited to learn about Abraxia having a citadel in Ghyran. That's cool. But the ideas that they planted in discussing Phoenicium were interesting. Like, it makes me wonder about the divide between elves and humans with the rest of Cities of Sigmar. It seems like the Lumineth Realm Lords knew what was coming to Ghyran and moved in to try and stop it rather than like being interrupted mid-coup. So it was just kind of an ambiguous thing. They brought up a really interesting and compelling perspective of inner tension in cities and then just kind of never addressed it. As for Vandus and Kull, I think another one of those conclusive lines about the fate of these guys would have been awesome, right? Like, even if it had said, like, Khorne recalled his champion, the great horn rat had set plans in motion and the blood god would have his servants there to capitalize on them. Then we would be like, okay, so Kull didn't just, like, look down, see Vandus, and choose not to fight him. Now he's a demon. And that's even sensical, because historically, Khorne treats his greater demons like Scarbrand like yo-yos, and he just pings them all over the universe. And as for Vandus, I love the idea that the hero who led us into AOS is the one leading us into this new chapter with the biggest rules right that AOS has had. I really like the painful relationship that was captured between him and Hyonis, and the work that has to be done to honor these Stormcast Eternals who gave everything through their reforgings. Anyway, friends, those are my final thoughts here on the Dawnbringer series, concluding all its fates, the little slides here at the end. I want to hear your thoughts on the series as a whole. Tell me down below, and I will be chatting with you there. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.